seem so far away. Many lived and died to find the light away. I was sleeping rather peaceful, but sure as sunlight starts the day, something shined and brought me to my feet again. I saw mountains rise and crumble in a day. Time was just another day. And she said, far away, you're so close that you wouldn't believe it. Hide away, now come undone. Far away, you're so close that you wouldn't believe it. Hide away, now come undone. We were seeking all the pieces, but it's not just what you say and what you do. If you're not letting the heartbeat breathe through you, step through shadows and I'll see you better, dear. Feels so good to be this clear. And she said, far away, it's so close that you wouldn't believe it. Now the way have come undone. Far away, it's so close that you wouldn't believe it. Now that we have come undone. Circling again. No need to look back from now to then. I love being here with you. I know you and you me too. Far away, it's out here and we plainly can see it. Another way have come undone. Oh, I'm a stowaway in a world that you wouldn't believe. It's not far away. I've come undone. Oh, far away. It's so close and I know you can feel it now that we have come undone.
given their life in the most worthy of all things, in the only way that can truly demand the life from you, and that is in service to the spirit of the West. About the heroes of Western time. Throughout all of our history. Read about the heroes of Western throughout all of our history. In the midst of combat, bullets flying by, they were able to maintain their composure, and they knew that if their time was called, they will have given their life in the most worthy of all things, in the only way that can truly demand the life from you, and that is in service to the spirit of the West.
And it is late night somewhere, ladies and gentlemen. You might be able to hear the music still playing in the background, and that's fine. I don't know, maybe you can. I imagine you can. I'm just making a little step here, and then I will bring forward the wonderful Mr. Jared George, and he will be able to join us. Can you hear the music playing? We're still rocking out. Having a little bit of an issue. Not a big issue. And we bring Mr. George into the conversation, and there he is.
Hello.
Hello, friend.
I'm getting a little feedback.
You getting feedback, or are you just hearing the music playing over my mic?
No, I'm hearing myself.
Oh, how about this? How about now? Can you hear yourself?
See. No,
Any
that's
better?
good. That's good. I appreciate, as we both do, you're crowding the mic and giving your late night radio voice. But
Hey,
it was peaking a little bit. Better now. It was gaining. It was distorting a bit.
Oh. I can also, if you need any adjustment on your end or on my end, I can make changes there. And it looks like our first wonderful guest is all ready to join us.
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, it's been so long since we've done this. Not that it was ever a regular thing. It was always kind of a special thing. But it really was born out of the first anniversary show 2 years ago. And we mostly did its late night somewheres in 2019. I think a couple of them crept in to 2020. No, maybe not even. I'm not even sure. I'd have to go look at it. But they're all on the site, as you know, I always like to say. But there are a lot of people who have come our way since then, in the last year and a half, who probably, they're like, what is this? And, well, as you can see, it's very infrequent. But sometimes we like to do this audio-only show. And it's audio-only because it gives that late-night FM radio feel. And it's also good for, we could just send a quick message to another friend of ours. And the fact that it's audio-only means they don't have to worry about how they look or something like that, especially if it's a woman. She's like, oh, I just showered, my hair's wet. It's a Saturday night. Doesn't matter. You have no excuse. You just come on. But it also just kind of brings something different out of people when it's very freewheeling and you're not on camera. So for anyone new to this, it's especially appropriate for a birthday celebration like tonight. This is literally, we have no idea who's going to come on. We have a few friends like Carl, who we mentioned it to, and he said he's gracious enough and had the time to come on. But we have no idea what we're going to say. It's totally impromptu. We can bring on different friends or even people from the chat. Of course, if you're someone we don't know and we give you the opportunity to come on, you have to behave yourself. If you start saying wacky things, we're gonna have to kick you off. But that's not even really been an issue, to tell you the truth. But that's what It's Late Night Somewhere is about. So that's the prologue. And now we could see where the night will take us, my friend.
Indeed. So just let me ask you a technical question. When I made a change in the settings, and you could no longer hear yourself, could you still hear the music in the background?
I feel like I did for a second.
All right. Well, let's try that again. Let's see what happens.
Is your vision to have the music playing very slightly in the background?
No. I was just wondering, since we rolled in and ILNS style, are you able to hear that?
I do hear it a tiny bit in the background. Yeah, it's a nice little ambiance. People in the chat will have to tell us how it's working for them too.
Well, we can fiddle with those knobs maybe a bit later. Let's go ahead and bring Carl.
Yeah, it is Saturday night.
It is all normal house rules.
My knobs are spoken for, but thank you.
All normal house rules apply, of course, for our big sister listening, AI. She always has a big ear, and it's always against the door. So bring forward Carl. What's going on, brother? How are you doing?
Hey, I enjoyed your intro voice. It sounded kind of like the Shadow. Have you ever heard that classic radio show from the 40s? Yeah, it's like
I think I have.
Yeah, they had a tagline. I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was like few know what evil lurks in the hearts of men, but the Shadow knows. And he's like this, he's like this 1940s character. He's like I don't know if he was a detective or some kind of superhero.
Yes, you're ringing a bell. I don't know where I'd seen that growing up, but
yeah, I'm sure there's something on YouTube about it. But yeah,
good call.
Yeah, there's a lot been happening lately. It's amazing how quick the news piles up with Bitcoin. It's just back to back, constantly throughout the day, and something really exciting happened today.
Let us know about that.
Well, I mean, obviously, recently we've been kind of lucky with the price going up perpetually. It seems like it's just not backing down. But more importantly, there's I should preface this. I should say there's this guy that I have long suspected, and a lot of people, it's not just me, have long suspected to be Satoshi Nakamoto, and he has a Twitter account. And he has recently been.
That would be for anyone listening and who wouldn't know. That would be the man who started Bitcoin.
Right. Anyway, he has recently been tweeting some things that are actually quite pro-white. In fact, just today, he retweeted Keith Woods.
Really?
So this is a guy that is not in our milieu as far as like politics goes, but he's certainly paying attention to us, and he's actually been kind of getting emotional recently in reaction to a bunch of tweets that have been going around related to like libertarians have been attacking Harvard and these Ivy League schools for discriminating against Asian students, right? Which is, of course, that's their way of, attacking affirmative action without actually defending whites. And anyway, so he comes out and he calls these people out. He says, you're just pussies, you're cowards. And yeah, so this culminated with him finally retweeting Keith. But anyway, this guy's name is Nick Szabo. Szabo for those who are searching for him. Super smart guy. He actually was hard at work trying to figure out a way to make an internet native currency way back in the 1980s. So this guy's been at it for a long time. And so that's one of the reasons that a lot of people think it's him. But anyway, it would be amazing if he were in our corner, because the current estimates are that Satoshi Nakamoto has around 900,000 Bitcoins. So if you multiply 900,000 by the current price,
which is in the 40,000s or so, low 40s.
It's currently around 56,000, actually.
Oh, I haven't checked. I guess mine went up a little. I guess I made a little money this week. Well, that's nice.
Yeah, you do. But you're talking about somebody who, by the end of this cycle, he may not be the richest man in the world, but he'll certainly be in the top 3. And so that would be a very big deal.
All of a sudden, if you see me and Jason with CNN level sets and starting to make feature films, you'll know what happened.
Exactly, right.
I don't know if he's retweeting Woods.
We have to
probably Woods with.
We have to get him. Yeah, we have to get him. Yeah. Well, maybe he'll share the wealth among many.
Yeah, I'm sure he will.
We'll see.
He's a super smart guy. I've liked Nick Szabo for a while. He's written some amazing essays too. He's got a great blog called, the title of his blog is Unenumerated. And he's written some awesome essays about the history of Europe, and in particular like the UK, and sort of how he came up with a bunch of theories about why the Industrial Revolution started in the UK versus elsewhere. And he ran into things related to race. Yeah. But anyway, just a really cool guy.
That subject relates a bit, not specifically let's say the Industrial Revolution, but just the broader, say, British Empire and ingenuity of certain European countries, to where you started with the Ivy League schools and elite schools, and how they have a certain reputation. Some of that reputation is due to Hollywood programming and things like that. And even though it's in any day, in any age, it's always the people with the wealth who are, it's easy to lump criticism on them and make fun of them and be the object of scorn. That's always going to happen to some degree. Right. There are people who have a lot of assets that say things like, the most hated people in the world are actually always the rich. Now, we have to remember that before all of this modern BS, like what you were speaking about with admissions, those schools and the culture that went along with them, no one's saying it was perfect. Nothing's ever perfect. But in our people, whether it be in the British system or in the Ivy League or Ivy kind of equivalent schools in the U.S., it was to breed a leadership class, and there was more of a sense in general of a noblesse oblige, and there was also a sense of this, some things that are seen as stuffy and outdated now, like certain sports, were actually they were a training ground for strategic thinking, for, of course, an officer class on the battlefield. I read a quote earlier that the British used to say that Waterloo was won and the roots of the British Empire were sown on the playing fields of Eton.
Right.
There's a lot to that, and there's a lot to the fact that now even our Ivy League schools and the equivalents, that are elites, that you don't even know if someone really qualified for them because of all of the different affirmative action kind of
right.
processes.
Well, it's interesting because it's like I think you're right. People hate the rich sort of as a class, right? But they don't. But when it comes to specifics, in particular, Americans love the rich, right? Like you could throw millionaires and billionaires pictures in front of people, and the average American's going to love them. It's kind of bizarre. It's like they theoretically hate them, but when given a specific example, they're like, oh no, I really love this multi-millionaire who says horrible things about poor people, So, but and then also we have this kind of strange situation now where the rich are kind of encouraged and not necessarily encouraged. I would say like maybe it's almost like they're kind of trying to mimic the lower classes. So, you know, everybody, especially like, you know, nouveau riche, when somebody gets rich, the first thing they do is they go out and buy a bunch of stupid crap that is frankly, you know, it's essentially the props for a rap music video. You know, it's just all the chains and the Lamborghini and all that garbage. But you know, rich people will wear sweatpants in public. You know, there's not really this drive anymore to try to dress your best in public. Whereas, you know, like even as recently as like the 1960s in America, you know, no man would leave the house without a hat and a suit.
Yeah, that was in the working classes too, though. I've heard that the Depression changed a lot. That the displays of wealth in the American cities, they tried to play that down somewhat after the Depression. There's obviously reasons for that. But you know, I don't want to get you off track. I'm not sure if you're still going with something, but since you mentioned Americans kind of love-hate relationships with very, very wealthy people, I feel like you're a good guy to ask this question to. I know your expertise is Bitcoin. For anyone who doesn't know, Carl was recently a guest on the After Party and gave us a great overview of Bitcoin and some other aspects of financial industry, specifically the GameStop short situation that was going on recently. But Elon Musk has kind of this little cult around him. Yeah. And I feel like you might have something to say about that.
Yeah.
What, do you have opinions on Elon Musk? Because I've heard some people say that even though he's not specifically speaking about issues that we care about, that he tends in a certain direction that seems to give people some glimmers of hope, although we know people project a lot onto celebrities. I've also heard people say that he's just another agent of, you know, the agenda and clown world and all that kind of thing, because I do hear him talking about transhumanism. He gets a little too excited about transhumanism. And he's kind of the face that'll go on Joe Rogan and sell it to the average person. Where do you come down on that?
I really like Elon Musk. Now don't get me wrong, I don't know that I would fully trust him, but I would say that he's like, as far as like wealthy people go, and as far as like people who are mainstream, I think he's just awesome. And the reason is like, there's several reasons. And I talked to Greg Johnson about this on his podcast at one point, but basically, if you know Elon's history, you know that he is originally from South Africa.
Yes.
And so he's very familiar with racial strife and what's going on there. And he's said in an interview, somebody asked him in an interview way back, they said, what is the best decision you ever made in your life? And he thought about it for a second and he said, leaving South Africa. So he knows about that. And the other reason I like him is that in another interview, in fact, the clip might actually be on YouTube also. He was asked about what he thought the most pressing issue going forward was. And this was before the whole AI craze, where, you know, recently Elon Musk has really been worried about artificial intelligence. But prior to this, they asked him what his biggest fear was. And he said that it was actually a population collapse in the West. And he said that he wants Western women to be having more children. So those two things, and then also the fact too that he's got like, I think like 6 kids of his own. So it just strikes me that he's kind of like, maybe if not consciously, maybe like subconsciously attuned to what, you know, people in our circles think about and worry about.
Has he said anything other than that initial comment about concern for South Africa and what's going on there?
He may have, but if he has, I'm not familiar with it. I know that, you know, somebody in his position, just by virtue of the fact that he's in charge of a publicly traded company, he's going to have to be super careful about what he says.
Of course.
So yeah, he probably knows not to get too specific there. Of course, he's also got SpaceX, which is his other company that mainly makes money from blasting rockets off for the U.S. government and stuff. And
very Faustian, if nothing else, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, SpaceX, if you've ever watched the videos of those rockets like coming back down from space and landing, it's just it's honestly jaw dropping. It's just one of the coolest things.
Yeah. And he put all of his assets into that from PayPal, right?
Yeah.
I saw someone tweet that out, that he basically, he made something like 180 million from the first, when PayPal was sold.
Right.
And he literally put all of it into these projects, and he borrowed money for rent.
Yeah. And that's kind of similar to what Peter Thiel did too, because when Peter Thiel, I think Peter Thiel made like 30 or something million from PayPal. And then what he did was he went and found like 24 startups in Silicon Valley that he thought had potential, and he put like 500,000 in each of the startups. And one of the startups just happened to be Facebook. And so as a result, Peter Thiel managed to become a billionaire through having a large, very early ownership in Facebook. And so he's actually on the board of directors of Facebook. But as far as like Elon Musk goes, just recently too, he put, I don't know if it happened, it might have happened after. I don't know if it was before or after I was on the show last time. He put $1.5 billion of Tesla's money into Bitcoin.
That news came out after you were on our show, but I did see that. Yes.
Yeah. And so I anticipated that actually. In fact, I think I said on your show, I said that corporations are going to start putting money into Bitcoin. Really that's only the first of many. There's going to be, in fact, I think that's part of the reason that the price is so elevated right now is because there's a lot of secret buying that has not yet been announced, and that over the next several weeks there's going to be a few corporations that come out and admit to the public that they've been buying Bitcoin. But
and then you think there's going to be a cascade.
Yeah, it'll. I mean, we're definitely headed into like another one of those mania phases where the price sort of gets above fair value. I don't think we're nearly there yet, though. I think that fair value, in my view, right now is probably around 60,000, and I base that just on the correlation with the S&P 500. So that's another story. But anyway, back to Elon Musk. I think that he has sort of an engineering mind, and so he met up with this guy named Michael Saylor, who is a super smart CEO of MicroStrategy, which is another company that bought like $1 billion worth of Bitcoin, and they did it kind of early. I think they bought their Bitcoin back when it was like a little over 10,000 or something. And so Michael Saylor went and basically explained on Twitter to Elon Musk how Bitcoin works and why he should probably own some. And so Elon basically just said to him, okay, well, come meet me in private and we'll discuss it. And so I think that because Elon has such an engineering mind, he probably studied it from the perspective of like energy use and the whole mining aspect of it. And he probably recognized that the mining aspect of it was really clever. And I can get into why, but essentially what's happening is that Bitcoin, because of the way the mining process works, Bitcoin essentially sets a price, a global price floor on the price of electricity. So if you can imagine like any place in the world, doesn't matter where it is, it could be in Antarctica or in like rural Pakistan or something, right? Any place in the world that has access to cheap electricity, that's going to be a good place to mine Bitcoin, because your profit margin is dependent upon how cheap your electricity is. If you can get nearly free electricity, then you are basically printing money when it comes to mining Bitcoin. So what that means is that, and I think, the mining industry, the global mining industry is is rapidly growing. And over time, people are starting to realize that what this means is that because mining Bitcoin is not geographically dependent. It's not like mining gold or something where you've got to be in a specific location to do it. Because it's geographic independent, that sets a global price floor on electricity. So all the cheapest electricity is going to be going to mining Bitcoin. And 9 times out of 10, the cheapest electricity happens to be renewables, like super cheap, hydroelectric or geothermal or whatever like that.
Yes.
And so Elon Musk, being who he is, like he's into solar and things like that, he saw the potential there. And I think that's part of the reason he got into it.
Yeah, I could see it. Hopefully, moving towards what I'd have heard about geothermal is interesting, but that's another matter. Here's the thing. Speaking about Elon Musk, that I was reminded of as you were speaking, the thing that I was dubious on is I've heard him again get on popular media that's meant for the everyman. I think it was the Joe Rogan show in particular, where he was speaking about having some kind of interface where your brain is hooked up,
right?
More or less, like you can think something and then text it, and eventually, we're going to be these cyborgs. And it's hard to tell if he's just, as you said, he's such an engineer where he can't help himself. It's just who he is, that he's going to be fascinated with that, or because it could be a little of both, that he, again, as cool as he thinks he is, and I see people in the chat saying, oh, he's based, is that he's one of the guys who's going to be the friendly face,
right,
that sells us on things like that.
Transhumanism. Yeah. See, this is one thing that it's sort of a philosophical thing, because I personally am not. I don't support putting chips anywhere in your body. Like,
no.
I've seen people who put chips in their hand, like underneath the skin in their hand.
They've already done it for security clearance, and certain corporations in Sweden, people volunteer to do it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, naturally. Yeah. Well, anyway, it's just that sort of thing is like counter to. Well, I mean, it's counter to human nature, because it's like, to me, we evolved over millions and millions of years to occupy a certain niche in the environment, and to fundamentally alter your body you're essentially setting yourself up for unhappiness, because you're gonna end up having wacky imbalances in your life. But anyway,
and open yourself to being manipulated by who knows what outside.
Right. And so the elites, they're going to want to control as much as they can. But see, this is like gets down to this ideological question, or maybe like philosophical, which is that do you think that it's even possible to stop this train? Right. There's some people who, even if they don't like it, will tell you, well, if a new technology comes along and it gives people power, that technology is going to be implemented to the max. It's inevitable, and you can make laws against it. You can try to stop it, but it is inevitable.
There'll be a scramble for it.
Right. And so I don't, the reason I don't fully fall into that camp, I don't think that's true, is because imagine you went back in time and you told people, like 1,000 years ago or something, that we would have handguns and that you could just buy a gun and shoot it and kill somebody, right? Well, way back then, if you told somebody about this new technology called a gun, they would instantly think that, well, that just means everybody's going to die. Everybody's going to get a gun, and anybody that pisses somebody off, they're going to go shoot them. But the reality of the matter is that, we do have lots of fatalities related to gun ownership, but even though we have access to that technology, it hasn't really cascaded into this, omnipotent, ubiquitous situation where everybody's getting killed by guns all the time.
But isn't the? I follow what you're saying,
right.
But isn't the example of the gun more balanced or bilateral, where if I put a chip in you, Carl, it's a unilateral, there's a unilateral element where I, as the state or as an NGO or as God knows what agency or who I'm working for, I could put it in you under the most benevolent pretense, but there's something now in your body that I or the people I work for can release something or track you or any number of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's that kind of imbalance is
it's not reciprocal.
Right. It's not reciprocal. And, you throughout history, you will have imbalances like that. And eventually, hopefully, God willing, they'll balance themselves out again at some point. But the issue is the issue we face is that we don't want to have to wait for that to occur, because these types of powerful imbalances can last centuries. Right. And, in particular, like I think of like a situation like you have in China. The Chinese, I should be careful what I say, but just by nature of their culture, they have a tendency to be far more amenable to authoritarian rule than Westerners are. And so, that might actually end up benefiting them in some ways. But I think that over the long term, that does have a tendency to, and this is one place where like the founding fathers of the U.S. were right, which is that it doesn't matter how good the government is to begin with. Eventually the sociopaths will get into it and will start to kind of steer the ship toward the iceberg. So yeah, that's something we have to constantly be on the lookout for. But yeah, like Elon Musk, I'm really wary of like getting, anything having to do with the merger of biology and artificial intelligence, things like that. That kind of worries me. AI though, I think in the medium term, like in the next 20 years, I think AI is going to be a fantastic thing. And I think it's going to be great because it will, I think it will return us to an economy that is a little bit more geared toward family orientation. So it's going to be like, fewer women in the workforce, in other words. Right now, there's this huge push and to get as many young women as possible to work, and especially when they're able to have children, and that's what's causing the fertility rate to decline so much in the West. And so I think that AI might end up replacing a lot of those jobs that these young women are doing. It'll also replace a bunch of jobs that men do too, but I think it'll primarily hit the jobs that women do. And I think that that'll probably actually, have a positive effect on fertility. That's just a hunch, but we'll see.
Let me jump in really quickly on the 2 points. The first one is the cyborg nature. The idea of merging technology with our flesh, to me, seems to really miss, it's sort of like a giant blind spot, the fact that almost the moment you buy something technological, it is outdated. There's something superior that comes along. So you be automatically outdated. I mean, within like 6 months, whatever you had implanted in your flesh would be outdated by better hardware. I understand that there could be a difference there with uploading software or something of this nature, but there would be superior hardware that would come along instantly, relatively speaking, of course. And the other thing I just wanted to toss in is when it comes to, just for Big Sister, the Chinese are not a monolithic group. And so there are going to be some Chinese who are going to be, as Carl said, more amenable to certain things, and others who are not going to be more amenable. It's just important that Big Sister knows that there are no entire groups of people that do anything specifically for any particular reason. Certainly something that could be considered as negative So we know her ears on the door.
Right,
It's funny how we've gone from big brother to big sister, eh?
Yes.
Carl, if you have any more thoughts on AI, it's not something that's come up on shows Jason and I do too much, if I remember correctly, Jason. I'm definitely curious to hear more about it. I know a lot of people fear, of course, that it's going to decimate the labor force. It's already been decimated with offshoring. And it would be one thing if we had a organic, ordered, homogenous society where, as we were speaking about earlier, the people who were in leadership positions had more of a sense of noblesse oblige, that we're all in this together, that we share a common heritage and common destiny. And you could have an in-between period where there was maybe some more social welfare to kind of transition people into a different way of being. Obviously, given the current system, I have zero faith that anything of that nature would be beneficial. But how do you see all that going, since you seem to have a more positive view of it?
I think that I think that AI is going to create really positive outcomes in most people's lives. And I think the reason for that is because it's probably going to, like I said, I think it'll return a focus on family and staying home for women and children. Also, I could see a scenario where we do have some kind of like a universal basic income for the lower classes that is contingent. What it'll be is it probably won't just be something where you just sit on your couch and eat Doritos and receive a check every month, right? It'll hopefully be something where you're in some way contributing to the community, either like maybe like beautification, cleaning up litter, doing things with educating children and things like that. Basically improving your network of your community, and hopefully that will be one of the things that we'll see come out of this. But I think that this doom about AI is a little bit misplaced, because it's going to be kind of like a mutually assured destruction thing, right? Every nation is going to get it at nearly the same time. The code will leak. So if Google or Microsoft or some Chinese firm comes up with some incredible new artificial intelligence algorithm, it will eventually wiggle its way out into the rest of the world, and everybody will have access to it. So it just doesn't worry me for that reason. The other thing I think will happen is I think we'll see nuclear proliferation. I think we'll see more small nations get access to nuclear weapons, which will be a great thing as far as like creating more spheres of influence and more independence away from these large global empires, like the Western Anglo-American Judeo Empire. And I'm trying to think. I think you look at like what AI is doing today. It's not yet really. I mean, it's having some effect as far as like robotics goes, and that's something I'll get into in a second. But the big thing that AI is really doing right now is it's doing deep fakes. So you've got software that can make somebody's face look like an entirely different person. So you can take a video of somebody talking, and then say, okay, I want this person to look like, Obama or Trump or something. And then it'll basically morph the person's face into that other person, if, given enough images of the target person. Well, I think this is going to be amazing. And I think the reason it's going to be awesome is because it will allow dissident groups to take any media that Hollywood produces, kick out an actor that we don't like, and replace it with somebody we do like, or pop in a face of somebody we do like. So you'll be able to basically customize your movies and your television shows, and you could say, okay, I like this actor, or I think that this person would be better suited, or whatever, or I would prefer if this person were a different race or a different gender or whatever. You'll be able to do that, and the entire series and movie will be changed to accommodate that.
So you think we're going to be able to customize our media to that?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be incredible. I think you'll be able to click a button and be able to just completely change the content of all advertisements, all popular media and videos you see on the internet to more accurately reflect what you would prefer to see. And that's going to have a huge effect on the content that people consume, especially like I said, with dissident groups. So, we've got Hollywood constantly pushing this diversity trope, but there's no reason why that has to exist forever, and it won't. It's not going to exist forever. We'll be able to get rid of that. And that's pretty exciting.
This is largely going to take place on apps in your own computers and mobile devices. Yeah,
I can imagine it'll probably be like just a filter you would put on your browser. It'd be kind of like ad block, except instead of blocking ads, you'd be blocking certain features or traits or individuals that you don't like, or you would prefer to see as a different person. Yeah, I know it sounds like superficially, it sounds kind of crass, but the fact of the matter is that's really where we're being hit the most is just sort of this constant shoving of diversity in people's faces all the time. I went to the UK. I went to Scotland actually a couple years ago for the first time, and when I was there, I was just shocked because every time I would turn on the TV, it was like, black people in every ad, and all over the BBC, all the time. It's like, this is a country that's 90-something% white, and it's like, why am I seeing all this diversity? It doesn't make sense.
Carl, let me ask you: Do you believe that governments are going to, when you're discussing these matters, you're putting them into some sort of context? In that context, are the governments made benevolent by the technology, or are the governments benevolent and then the technology is able to serve these people this way?
I think that the governments are run by people who, at least now they are, they're run by people who enjoy comfort, and they don't want to rock the boat too much. And we know this for a fact because you look at how, when Biden took office, everybody was really scared that he was going to crack down really hard on pro-whites. We're not really seeing it yet. We're seeing some of it kind of at the fringes and at the edges, but it's mostly corporations that are doing the censorship and the crackdowns. We're seeing, of course, prosecutions of people who entered the Capitol building and things like that. But so far, we haven't really seen the Justice Department going after, like AmRen and groups like that. But I think
we all have nothing to do with his administration.
Yeah. Well, but you look at what Biden did when he came into office, and it was like an open season on Antifa, right? So Antifa had been, during Trump administration, Antifa and Black Lives Matter were allowed to roam the streets like wild animals. Whereas now it's like, oh, well, Biden's in office, and so therefore the police are entitled to crack skulls and, take names. Well, I think that's just a reflection of the elites, right? The elites, obviously they are center left. They're not, now don't get me wrong, they are fully, deep down, and I think their long-term plan, of course, is a gradual demographic change. But short-term, they don't want to rock the boat too much because they know if they do, that white discontent will grow. So I think that this aging elite wants to finish out their years on Earth, assuming, of course, they don't manage to get some kind of a stem cell thing that gives them another 50 years of life or whatever. They want to finish out their lives in comfort, and the way to do that is to give people UBI and to not demand that people receive, subcutaneous chips and things like that, right? They don't want to bring in the full dystopian nightmare just yet. So I think that now it is funny though. We do see, if you're on Facebook, you see consistently, it's like every week you see a new story about like, so-and-so says eating bugs is good for you and stuff like that, and living in a pod. And there's this whole meme about that sort of thing. It is interesting that we're seeing this. It's almost like they're kind of like trying to make poverty chic, they're like trying to get people accustomed to the idea of like, well, you're going to be living, you're going to be suffering a much lower quality of life in the near future. So get used to eating bug protein or whatever. But I just view that as kind of, it's almost like a humiliation ritual for them in a way. I don't know if they themselves take it seriously, because if you click on these stories and you actually read them and you look at what they're doing with this stuff, it's almost just like it's mainly just clickbait for the most part from what I'm seeing. So I'm not too worried about that. But what I am interested in is I am interested in artificial intelligence and how it's going to affect robotics. I think that what's going to happen is you'll see farming in particular benefit from this, because there are robotics that are being developed right now that are near perfected. That one of these robots only costs $30,000, which sounds like a lot, but when you compare it with what you have to pay somebody to go out there and pick strawberries or whatever for 10 hours a day, it actually is pretty cheap. And so we're going to see that sort of thing in the future.
Let me hold the Carl, hold the your thoughts on the robots. I want to, and actually I'll just mention about the robots as well to sort of underscore the point that I'm about to make about the view of society that those who are going free hold. And that is this, that the predictions about robots and their ability to be able to do things like pick strawberries for us, to write legal arguments for us, and just about everything else under the sun has been something that anti-white oligarchs knew was on its way, that they knew was coming very shortly, and yet they still threw open the borders to Western civilizations,
right?
Bringing in uncountable numbers of wonderful border crossers with different biospirits. And they made arguments, of course, what we refer to as missing arguments, which are the moralized, intellectualized, sentimentalized pretext that they use to arrive at anti-white conclusions. So they brought these people in for something other than the work that they would provide, because they knew that robots, software would be able to do many of the things, most of the things, in just a couple of generations. They've known
right.
it a long time. So our position really is that these individuals, these anti-white oligarchs, are very much interested in white erasing Western kind in the West, throughout the world, wherever we live. And we look to the evidence, for example, like all of the bills that are moving through. I mean, you're mentioning, and just perhaps you probably just haven't heard of all of these things. I mean, you're focusing, human being can only focus on so many things at a time. And this is one of the places that we keep our eyes. And there are bills that are moving through, the bills that were written, hundreds and hundreds of, in fact, there are thousands actually, that identify race and with the target being Western kind. They are changing the payments. Of course, all of this may or may not be true. You have to check with CNN, ladies and gentlemen. The way that they're distributed to the population, putting non-white people ahead of white people, the businesses, the claim that small businesses are being destroyed by the anti-white oligarchs is a fraudulent claim, because they are only destroying the businesses owned, small and medium-sized, owned by white males. Everyone else has access to tax dollars in the form of loans and grants and et cetera, even the massive organizations. Right now, there is a Justice Department. And by the way, they are actually, with some of these bills, creating new departments, interagency departments. And in all of the verbiage paragraph after paragraph, they are talking about the white race. They use the anti-white slurs like white supremacy and this sort of thing. And they are going out and finding bodies to serve this, the villain in their anti-white narrative. I mean, you can see right now the Proud Boys are bodies that they are finding. There are religious groups out there that they are persecuting right now and investigating. You have Nick Fuentes and Patrick Casey that they are persecuting and they are focusing in on because they need bodies to be the villains in their story. Internationally, you see arrests. As soon as Biden got into office, there were a slew of arrests around the world. One of them, a well-known individual who makes these parody songs, and he plays the villain in the anti-white narrative. And they immediately
that was Mr. Bond, I think was his name.
they immediately were able to find him, and the reason, of course, would be that the federal government of the United States was unleashed to help the local authorities find the individual. We have a bill moving through right now, the Congress Domestic Terror Act, and it doesn't mention BLM, it doesn't mention Antifa, but it does speak extensively about white supremacy and how it is the main threat to the survival of the country. So there are people who are being arrested and political prisoners, as there have been for many decades now, white people who care about the well-being of whites, who get arrested and overcharged and then over-sentenced, sent to jail for the majority of their lives. Their lives are virtually over. So what we see when we observe these things is an anti-white oligarchy that is working as quickly as it can, constrained by merely really two things. And it's really by one thing, and that is what the general population of Western kind will tolerate. And what they will tolerate is that which they can be made to believe is evil enough to maybe bend the law or break the law, to persecute. And of course, we have all of these other laws coming forward, things that used to just be acceptable, things that used to just be part of the anti-white, so-called moral fabric of the country, where all laws and rules and codes were interpreted by an anti-white morality in a way that it was moral to arrive at an anti-white conclusion, even if it meant breaking the code or breaking the law or bending the law. So that's why I ended up, I really wanted to ask the question if you thought that the technology itself would somehow overcome the anti-white oligarchs, because I don't perceive that they are smug and just and they just want to be, let me put it this way, and then I'll pass it to you so we can hear back from you, brother. And that is this, and don't forget go back to the subject of the robots, but their satisfactory environment, their normal, their whatever that is for them to maintain their power, their luxury vis-a-vis other power holders around the world, could be an environment that looks nightmarish to us. It doesn't need to look like a big, beautiful, functioning United States the way that we see it and from our perspective, for them necessarily to maintain enough power relative to the other powers of the world and enough luxury to sate themselves until the end of time. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that. And then don't forget to go back to what you were about to say on the subject of robots.
No, I agree. I think I think I might have spoken a little bit too flippantly when I said that Biden was not going after dissidents, because obviously he is. Of course, I haven't been paying attention as much as you have, so I don't know about the bills that are going through. But we have to hope and pray, of course, that the courts determine that those are unconstitutional. But they found affirmative action constitutional, so who knows what they'll assent to. That's frightening to think about. And of course, they're going after middle class and poorer whites who can't afford lawyers and who who are not part of the kind of the ruling class. You know, they're the ones who theoretically could be replaced by the third world essentially. But yeah, it's my inclination is always just to sort of veer toward the optimistic, and that might be sort of a residual effect of the, being a former libertarian. Libertarians tend to have this kind of, everything's getting better all the time mentality. But yeah, it's the one thing that I think that like besides the court system, the one thing that I think would be preventing a dystopian outcome, at least in the medium term, would be the fact, like I said, that the more anti-white they become, or more overtly anti-white the legislation becomes, the more high IQ people you get who start to jump into our corner, like Nick Szabo, for instance, and that creates a parallel elite. Essentially, you've got two, and that's when you have two warring elites, that's when you really get a civil war. A civil war doesn't occur from the bottom up. It comes from two elite classes coming in disagreement. So yeah, we have to hope and pray, though, that it doesn't actually come to a hot war, because, and this is something that I see people, Fed posting and stupid stuff like that online about. It's the last thing we want is a hot war, because that's 9 times out of 10. If you look at history, you study history, 9 times out of 10, the bad guys win wars. So yeah. But yeah, as far as like, I guess we're as far as like AI goes and things like that, not only the main reason I'm optimistic about AI is because I do think that it will give us tools that we need to create really good media. And that's really what we need when we get right down to it. We need entertainment media. The left has managed to take control of culture via entertainment media. And so if we can lower the barrier to entry, so to speak, for entertainment media, which is constantly rising, by the way, like, I mean, the typical Hollywood movie now costs, $100 million plus to make. It's insane. Then we can, if we get our own quality entertainment media, then we can really create a parallel culture and hook a lot of young people into it. We've sort of kind of managed to do that with memes. Memes is sort of the cheap way to do it. You don't have to have any money to make a meme. But I'm thinking, and this is something that I want to do in the future, is I want to produce films and media that are going to be, if not, at least at first sort of subtly pro-white, and then sort of gradually work our way up into something very explicit. And I think one of the things that we really should look forward to doing and is to create a 24/7 streaming news channel. We need our own CNN, our own Fox News type of thing, right? That's everybody knows where it is, and anybody can click onto it. And even though people might disparage it publicly, they'll privately go and click on it to see what we're saying in reaction to current events as they happen, right? Because when there's breaking news, it's really important to hurry up and get out there with your take on it, because whoever comes up with the narrative or the spin first, they're the ones that typically win, right? You want to be the first one out there with your take on news. And that's the reason, like, CNN and all these billionaires want to have their own news channels, is because they want to put their own spin on news. But yeah, so that's one of the things that I was thinking AI might have a big impact on. But robotics, yeah, we can get into that if you want to.
Yeah, go ahead and go. Well, actually, we're talking about media. We're talking about entertainment. So let's bring forward the one and only Jeff Winston, who is with us. And then I have robotics written down here. We're not going to forget it, so don't go anywhere, Carl.
Sure.
But we agree completely on the idea of creating our own culture, on music, our own, to represent all facets of in fact, we just played, we had jazz the other day, and we're even open to White Wellbeing rap, White Wellbeing jazz, White Wellbeing rock, White Wellbeing poetry. We want it all. And we know for the exact reasons you're talking about. I mean, it becomes a person's life. And what we talk about in Going Free, of course, is that the subconscious mind that receives the entertainment doesn't know the difference between reality and fiction. And so it adopts what it sees as a reality, as sort of this omniscient reality. When a child sees a movie where the particular anti-white in the movie behaves a certain way when alone, and they're crying about how they're so oppressed, or some sort of aspect of the anti-white narrative that doesn't hold true in the real world. The data doesn't hold it up. Lived experience doesn't hold it up. The child then believes that this is the way these people actually think. This is their hearts. This is their inner selves, rather than knowing that actors were just reading out a script and told what to do. So yeah, we've been working hard, and it's been quite a struggle for me over 2 decades, trying to bring forward a group effort, which ran totally contradictory to everything else that folks were trying to do in the white sympathetic spheres. And I really had quite a moment some months ago now, where the reality was setting in for me that this dream of mine that I've been arguing for so many years is finally coming to fruition in the form of these Herculean and Titanic individuals coming to, of their own volition, the good light, the good message that we present in service to white well-being. Whereas in the past, there was this effort everywhere I faced in the white sympathetic spheres by people who were selfish. They wanted to put their own egos ahead, or their own success, their own aggrandizement ahead of the being of our people. They wanted to have this rigidly controlled environment where they would, the only way that there would be news or music, or it would be because they were running it, and it was some sort of corporate top-down environment, and they would somehow be lauded for doing so. So we have a complete agreement there. And we have Jeff, who is a magician and leads the White Art Collective. And it is a big part of service to white well-being, and growing every day. And I don't know if Jeff, if you're muted, I don't know if you're sitting by your computer right now, but maybe we can get a message to you if you're not, because we would like to hear from Jeff and some of his points about art and the importance of creating our own art and the various forms of art. This idea that if you're going to be white positive, it can only be heavy metal, or if you're going to be white positive, it can only be whatever. That is, of course, nonsense. We need the whole spectrum to be able, because white people enjoy and create the entire spectrum. But I think, Carl, you had something to say before to what I'm saying, something to say before we bring Jeff in for his thoughts on the question I was asking there. Carl, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, I think that a lot of psychology is incredibly simple, and it just boils down to monkey see, monkey do, right? If you show children movies and television shows, it really does get into their mentality, and it affects the way that they react and behave for the rest of their lives. Because we are essentially, we're assuming you are not, creationist. We are essentially primates, and so we will react according to how we are raised to react that way. So when you've got the Hollywood producing scripted reactions, people will react that way. And furthermore, I can actually I might actually hold off on talking about this, because I've actually written a note down about it, but I want to eventually bring it back up later. But I think that the effect of Hollywood and television has actually had a huge negative effect on relationships and how, particularly like romantic relationships. And I can talk about that later, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah, keep a note of that, Carl. I'd be interested to hear that too.
Yeah.
Jeff.
But is Jeff here?
Yes, Jeff is here. There you go.
I'm here. Hello. Yes. How you guys doing?
Great. Can you speak to, I know you were listening, can you speak to what I was saying about the importance of art to white well-being and the variety as well, and also the white pills, the optimism of so many new artists coming in that, Jeff actually is, he's having a chore with all of the new artists. He's saying rarely repeats some of this material anymore because there are so many new artists that are coming to the scene. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super important just capturing the imagination. Earlier, I think Laura Lee was after me on the stream, and she was saying, talking about the myth, and I think that is very interesting. And it's so much a part of getting people to. And kind of the reason we're in this situation is because people were convinced, largely through media, film, and stories, and myth, and so forth, that kind of what's happening right now was inevitable, but it was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, because if you convince enough people that something is inevitable, then they'll kind of go along with it and accept it, which goes into what you guys were talking about with the technology and the AI and all of that, which I have a lot of thoughts on that kind of stuff too. But yeah, like I think that's why because that kind of narrative is so powerful, we really need to harness it, and we're still trying to do that. We're trying to get the kind of infrastructure in place to where we can push our own narrative, and that's ultimately what it really is going to come down to. We're going to be in like a narrative battle. And I know, Jason, that's a lot of what you talk about is the anti-white narrative. Like that's the predominant narrative right now. And we're pushing a different narrative, and we're trying to we have to get our narrative to a level with so many people creating so much different, music and film and stories and visual arts and all of those things. And, and there's going to be little drops and pieces of all of our narrative kind of interwoven in there. And, what we're trying to do is get it powerful enough to amplify our signal to the level to where we can actually counteract the narrative that they're pushing, because they're pushing it so hard. And some of what we're going to do too is going to be overt propaganda, but it shouldn't be all of it. Like you're saying, like, it needs to be a spectrum. It's not just one style, and it's also not just one approach. Because I think a lot of people, when they first kind of get into this sphere, they have a tendency to be very overt about the ideas when they put it into the artistic form. But more and more, I see more people doing this, and I'm encouraging it more. And I have people reaching out to me who are like, I'm not really like, for instance, some guy was emailing me saying, I'm not really like a radical, or I'm not really this or that, or I don't have anything political in my content. And I'm like, good. I want more people, and I'm encouraging people, like, you don't have to make it political. You don't have to make it on the nose or overt. I just want people to genuinely express themselves, and be sincere. And I think that all of that the good stuff will be baked into that, because just expressing your honest perspective is, as a Westman, is good enough, like that is a unique thing. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. All you have to do is, because it's how we see the world. We see the world a particular way, and we kind of run up against that constantly, because they're literally saying, thinking logically, critical thinking, basically all of the things that kind of are the essence of people of European descent, white folk, are antithetical to all these other groups. And so, just us being ourselves is good enough. And that also translates into the art world, so I want to see more people and I'm going to encourage this more and more, people to just express yourself freely. And as long as it doesn't end up being anti-white, which if you're a sensible person, it won't be. And as long as it's not anti-traditionalist or anything like that, then it should be fine. The ideas will be kind of woven into it and inherent to it. And yeah, that's my statement on that.
See, that's everything you're saying there, brother, is absolutely perfect. And this really is bringing me back to a couple months ago when, for so many years, it was such a struggle against so many people who, for various reasons, they couldn't see, their hand in front of their faces. And it didn't matter how often they were wrong. I mean, I have somebody who wrote me recently asking about, do I know who Ed Dutton is? And he has this great argument about the mutants. And I just this past Sunday, I addressed this issue about the spiteful mutants, and ultimately how if I understand Ed's position clearly, then it will inevitably lead to white erasure. The idea that we can't do anything because there are too many spiteful mutants, and that eventually it's all going to be okay because Mormons have a lot of babies. I mean, this is, in my position, this is nonsense. It's just utter nonsense. And I know he's a brilliant guy, but this is the kind of thing, I think, when you are focused on pragmatically addressing the challenges that we face as a people, and knowing that my well-being is only achievable by way of our people's well-being. I think only then, seeing it in that light, can you ask the right questions and be able to get the right answers. If you're coming here for other reasons, then it's not going to happen. And one of the things that's beautiful about the position of service to white well-being, being a Westman, being a member of Western Kind, is that it draws the best people from all of these different white sympathetic spheres. It's absolutely remarkable. We can go through some of the most, some of the brightest luminaries. And when I say that, I'm not talking about somebody who just is maybe excessively educated and is an academic peacock with a lot of degrees in fields that are otherwise, useless if they were lost somewhere in the woods or what have you. But I mean, people who are able to overcome obstacles, people who are problem solvers, people who are dedicated. And when I'm talking about luminaries, those are the kind of people who I'm talking about. And we are brain draining every single other white sympathetic sphere rapidly. The best are coming here. And not only that, what's great too, is since this is an environment that's based on love, hope, and redemption, redemption meaning that we all come from, we've all done things, and we've all grown up in the anti-white narrative. We've all been infected with what we refer to as meme pathogens, these anti-white concepts. And their ancillary emotional connotations and the rest. We learn all of these things as though it's the real world. We know that we're coming with this. We know that we're going to stumble. And that is why we have so many successes. But focusing on this way ends up also not only drawing the best, but filtering out the problem people. And by problem people, I mean the whole spectrum. Folks who want to villainy signal, as the antagonist in the anti-white narrative, because that's how they've been taught to believe that this is how you behave when you care about Western Kind, all the way up to those who just want to pedantically prattle from dusk till dawn and all through the night and write super eloquently and intelligently and name every 16th century French philosopher that has ever trod planet Earth and put on too much French perfume. Those people are not very
or not eloquently.
Yeah,
I mean, I've heard some people recently who impressed me, and John and I are going to have on Learning in Public, who are very well educated, very smart guys, and they don't throw around these technical terms that you only have heard of if you have a PhD in philosophy. They use regular language to explain their concepts. Those are the guys you want to pay attention to, not the ones who throw around the terms just to sound smart.
Well, now here's an interesting thing where we can meld two things. Carl's talking about the use of technology to, I guess in a way, Carl, you can correct me if I'm misrepresenting, sort of circumvent the entertainment and the like that is produced by the regime's news and entertainment media. But will technology, in your estimation, become available, be produced, and therefore in a way that is therefore useful to people like Jeff Winston, who serves not only as a magnificent creator, a musician himself, an artist in many ways, but also able to organize artists, keep all of those flaming cats herded in a single direction. Will there be technology available, in your estimation, that will make things easier and more inexpensive for him, so that we could produce works that are tantamount or even better, certainly because they'll be harmonizing with our people's biospirit, and also able to reach our people in an increasing censorship-rich environment?
Yeah, so you look at recently there's been the rise of this thing called Odyssey, which is like an alternative to YouTube. And that's another really good example of something that I don't know exactly how the network functions in the same, it may function similarly to Bitcoin, but my understanding is that it's something that can't be easily censored. And so that this is something that, and I've watched videos on Odyssey, and it's amazing how high definition they are and how quickly they load. It's a much better system, I think, than BitChute, at least in its current form. But it's exciting the direction technology is headed. And I mean, with like I said, with AI, I think that the things that we'll see with AI in the next 4 to 5 years are just going to be stunning. I mean, you're going to be able to take an existing work of art, whether it be a movie or a painting or a poem or anything really, and you'll be able to tweak it, and change it, and the system will be able to push out something that's functionally similar to something that a human would have created, but altered in certain ways that you would prefer. I mean, it's just going to be astonishing what's possible. And so, as far as art goes, the other big thing that I see coming is we'll see possibly video games. People come up with already today, they have video game patches where you can go in and change the way your character looks and change the environment and things like that. I mean, one of the most entertaining things is to watch these patches that people, go on YouTube and look at these patches that people put on video games. It's hilarious. But yeah, I think that's, we're seeing kind of the move away from very centralized entertainment. And in a sense, that's kind of a bad thing, because you get more fragmentation of society, so that it makes it a little bit more difficult for people to meet each other and find things that they have in common that they relate to. But I think that when you ultimately, what it's going to come back to is it's going to come back to politics and race, so that the globalist position is fundamentally anti-white. And I think that just simply because there has to be a yang to that yin, you're going to see more and more people moving into our direction, even if they didn't initially do it because they were interested in pro-white content. They'll move in our direction simply because they are interested in an alternative to the rancid garbage art, if you could call it that. I use air quotes when I say art, of the mainstream. Because frankly, the mainstream, and this is something that I wish people would take to heart, right? I mean, there's so many people out there who are so talented, and I think that they are afraid to create things because that they think, well, I'm not going to live up to the standard, or I'm not going to be able to, there's billions of people out there. Why should I be able to make something that's actually quality compared to somebody else? Well, I mean, you look at what does get popular and what the elites choose to put before people, and it's slop. It's absolute slop. So we have a huge opening, I believe. We have it's essentially a giant gaping profit potential here and I say that in a good sense, right? This is something that's sustainable. In other words, I think that going forward, we're going to be able to create businesses that are profitable and that do sort of keep themselves going, in producing media. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel to create good art. That's another thing. Like, you're not required to. Nobody's giving you points for being totally original on everything, right? You should go out and find things that you like, including media that's mainstream, and tweak it, and put your own spin on it that that makes it unique or somewhat pro-white, and then put it out as your own. I mean, that's copying good art is entirely valid. The greatest artists copy.
As
right?
long as it moves people. That's the thing. You're speaking to a few points I know it's near and dear to me, things Jeff and I have spoken about. It's come up on the shows with Jason. You're absolutely right, Carl, about this perception people have about how producing something on a high level is this unattainable goal. First of all, on the technical aspect, I'll speak to Jason's question quickly. The technology is such where that is on our side, where even before you get to the next leaps that we have been ruminating over, like AI, look at where we currently are. I mean, I can use apps on my phone to create graphics for the art that goes along with my songs. Jeff can shoot a short film on a mobile phone. We didn't have that kind of thing 10, 20 years ago. And it's only tending in these directions where the barriers to entry in terms of budget and in terms of technical equipment, those are going down. And it's going to take, as Carl was speaking to, just a little bit of ingenuity. Doesn't mean originality. That's a whole bit of a different conversation too. There's this cult of feeling like you have to bring something out of the ether that's never been done before. And we all know that that's not really how it works anyway. Another thing, Carl, this is where I was actually beginning. I was saying it was near and dear to me, and it's come up in conversations that I've had with Jason and Jeff and all of us together, is that there's something more subtle. I've experienced it myself, and I've spoken to a lot of creative types in these spheres who feel the same, even if they're not specifically artists, things that are still more mind kind of work, like journalism, let's say. I've heard this from people who were young and in cities and trying to break into circles. Some of you who've listened to the show for a while might have heard me speak on this before. But just to say very briefly, is that there's this invisible wall. And I'll tie it to another thing you were talking about. One of my red pills, my proto red pills, I kind of call them, were really aesthetic. I'm not one of these guys who was reading deeply into politics and following politics. It's never really been my thing. My story is not, I was a leftist and then I was a libertarian and now I'm this and that. A lot of the unease that I felt, even going back to a pretty young age, definitely by the time I was in my teens, was just aesthetics. Like you were saying, like standards were lowering, the way people comport themselves, manners of speech, what passed for music. Something was just off about it. And like you were saying, it was slop, to borrow your term. And so that was an alert, but I didn't really have other things to contextualize it. So like a lot of young creative types, I tried somewhat to move in circles and be in cities where media happens. Or as I said, I've even spoken to people that aspire to be journalists, and you go to the cities and schools where journalism happens. And even if you're not, it's not like I had this channel at that time and my face and my name was out there. And even though I didn't have this as formulated in my own head and I couldn't articulate it as well as I could now and put all the pieces together, there was just something in the way I carried myself and what I valued and what I was drawn towards, and likewise what I was repulsed by, where now that I look back on it, I feel a lot of my peers and contemporaries in those circles they could just kind of sniff it on me. They could smell it on me that I wasn't one of them, that I wasn't a nihilistic hipster, quote unquote, progressive, anti-Western, anti-white kind of person. And even if they weren't as cognizant of those movements, they had the mind and the soul that was primed for that. Like a lot of them might be that way today.
Yeah.
I've heard that kind of story from many people. If I remember correctly, I think Jeff has had his own versions of that kind of thing. We basically all have our versions of that. And I'm careful when I talk about this too, because I don't want to make it sound like it's a sob story. Like, oh, I was secretly an undiscovered genius, and they never gave me a chance. It's not like I'm trying to have my revenge on it now. I'm very happy with how things went. I just, like any man has to do, I kind of grew and was able to draw more lines between things and eventually contextualize it, understand myself better so that I could understand how to navigate and move through the world better. And it all worked out beautifully, I think, because all of the different projects that I did were basically training grounds for what I'm doing now. And now I'm able to funnel my creativity into something that's worthwhile and has meaning for me. And I'm sure same of Jeff and all the people who are creative and involved in what we do. So all of that plays into it. And then one more thing, because I know Eke Lux, who we speak to often, is in the wings, and he might be joining soon. And he's spoken about this recently. Is to your last point, Carl, there's a lot of old stories that are public domain that are ripe for the picking. You need an idea about a novella or a film. Look to our myths. Look to our fairy tales. Look to our folk tales. I mean,
meanwhile, Hollywood is just like doing sequel after sequel after sequel. They're just ignoring all these amazing literature.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Could I say something real quick to Carl's points on the technology there from Jason's question? Yeah, I think really like one of the most amazing technologies I think that we can utilize to our advantage is just streaming. And we also don't need to be dependent. I know people are talking about Odyssey. I've already had people pointing out who owns this. And some people are saying, oh, it's blockchain, so, you can't be banned. But I mean, that's what DLive said. I'm at a point where I think if we don't own and control our own platforms, then we're just going to keep playing Frogger with the censorship. So I'm more aimed at building our own platforms that are, that's the only way to really be resistant from this, and, getting them up to snuff with the highest quality, the media, or the medium being the message in a sense, they have to be high quality and look good and all that kind of thing. But that's what I'm gearing towards on that front. Because I just don't think we can just kind of keep going through this. But streaming is amazing, and like there's no reason, even just with that technology alone, that we couldn't create like a whole network of affiliates who were boosting our signal like all across the world,
exactly.
not just decentralized. That's what I think about, is like we need a network of people who kind of have a more localized presence with that kind of technology. Almost like recreating the way that television stations and radio stations, I guess they still kind of work, in that way, but you know what I mean? Like, I think we can need to recreate kind of a network like that, but with streaming. And I think also just building our own, because what we've seen is like, every time people jump to a new platform, and I have heard a lot of good things about Odyssey, but it's just someone's already telling me that one of the Rootless International clique owns this, or this is just what I heard hearsay today. I'm like, well, of course, this is what always happens. It's like, or Parler, and then that just imploded in on itself, like so many of these do. Gab has been resilient, which is great, but.
Well, imagine like, if there's breaking news in the world, the people's first inclination is always to cut on the TV and go to Fox News or CNN. Imagine if you knew, for sure that there was always a 24/7 pro-white news channel that you could it was streaming all the time and you could go to it. It was a website. I think that would be brilliant. I think everybody would, anytime there's big breaking news, everybody would go to it right away.
Jason's almost there. You know, he streams like 12 hours a day now on Sundays.
Right.
He's training himself to just be on air all the time.
Can I say, I want to say something else about the AI thing. That's an interesting thing too, because that's kind of double-edged as far as that technology goes, in the sense that you're saying, you know, like, oh, well, you could have the AI do manipulate your artwork for you in certain ways that you're wanting. But like, for instance, let's take like auto-tune, right? Basically, it makes it to where people who can't sing can sound like they can sing. So it actually crowds people who can actually sing out of the market.
I refuse to use it.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I'm a purist. I have used it a couple times, but like very begrudgingly. I'm pretty accurate with my singing. I've used it for various reasons, but like
I'll use not to get nerdy audiophile, Jeff. But I've said this before, but just in the interest of being an honest Westman, I will just quickly say I have 2 songs out so far, so it's like I have this whole body of work as a musician, but more on the way. I do use certain pitch corrections, but they used to do that with analog tape. I mean, that's not the same thing as auto-tune. Like,
it must be. I mean, whatever you're using must be very subtle, because I don't hear it. I mean,
they would take a word, let's say in the old days of analog tape, and maybe the singer was a little sharp or a little flat on it, and they would speed up or slow down the tape a little bit to fix that. So there's like, I can go in and tweak little sounds like that. And in the interest of time, I admit I've done that. And I still want to challenge myself to get better as a singer, where I don't even need to do that. But when you talk about auto-tune, as Jeff is saying, you literally can just sing entirely off pitch. and it digitally, the ones and zeros, whatever the coding is doing, digitally corrects you. And that's nonsense. That means you can't even do it.
Yeah, but you end up sounding like a rapper or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what they do is they keep it on a setting so that you purposely can hear the swing. Like, like they've done it in a way where it's become part of the quote unquote aesthetic.
Yeah,
I see.
Daft Punk kind of, I don't know if they were the first one to do that, but they're like everything that singing and like all the Daft Punk stuff, all the vocalizations, that's auto-tune. And then but all the rappers started doing it, or with the singers in the rap songs, that started like in the mid 2000s, and that just became like the standard sound. I think it's kind of gone away now. Now they're just going for like hyper degeneracy. That's the new thing. Just, you know, like WAP with Cardi B or whatever.
Yeah, it's funny.
Tattoos on the face, facial tattoos.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's funny. It's like I've been, you know, I don't listen to rap music, but it's funny because like as sort of an outsider, you can kind of see all the different phases it's going through, and it goes pretty quick. Like, you know, there was that period where there was that guy who had like the Skittles face or whatever, like, you know, like they have weird aesthetics.
69, I think is
yeah. And then there was before him, they were doing it's like they all had kind of the same clicky beat. It was like tap 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 tap. It was like super quick beat to it.
It's called a trap beat.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's like they, you know, you kind of wonder, like, you know, they're just going through these iterations so quickly, and it's like you kind of wonder what are they going to come up with next.
Well, the thing is, Carl, the same few people in Los Angeles produce all of those different quote unquote artists. So
right.
So the thing that's funny about this, and even before this phase with the rappers you're talking about, I don't want to upset anyone listening, but I think you could even go back a couple decades, and a lot of the pop starlets they all sounded like each other. Like, I would be like, why are you a fan of Jessica Simpson and not Britney Spears, the other way around? It's like, how do you even know, like, what is really the
what's the difference between the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC?
It's just how the guys look.
Their names,
right. But musically, it's not. It's all the same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's no character to it.
Yeah. Right. No, that's exactly what's missing is character. It's all, and that just goes back to what I was saying. It's like it is the technology, kind of the electronic, you know, it makes everything very uniform, and then there's there, we could nerd out on it. So like compression makes everything, it flattens everything, and it kind of takes away dynamics, but it makes it's what people are used to hearing, and they think it is good, but almost everything, in my opinion, is over compressed. So
yeah, we're getting into audio territory. I don't think we're gonna lose. I don't think we're gonna lose people. But
trust me, I'm one of the biggest audiophiles. I've got $2,000 headphones. I'm like a whack job when it comes to that. But
yeah. We've spoken about this before. It's come up in other interviews. I spoke about it a lot, the loudness wars, when my first song came out, and I did some shows in like late November, early December. So if you want to go find those and geek out on it, fine. But I don't want to lose people. But suffice it to say, yeah, there's no depth in the music now, in terms of the way that I put it real quick, because I try to put myself in the shoes of people that have no idea what this means. Like, what does compression mean? And it's like, imagine looking at a painting, everybody. Imagine looking at a painting where everything is in the foreground. There's no depth. There's nothing in the background. So what they do in these studios is to give the apparent they make it seem louder than the last song you listen to, because in this day and age of zero nuance, it's like, oh, if it's louder, it's better. Every instrument is as loud as the other.
It's designed to sound good in a cheap Toyota car speakers.
Yeah. But what happens is it exhausts your ears. It actually, like, I'm not making that up. It's not my subjective taste. This has actually been studied, like the acoustics of sound and the physiology of our ears. It exhausts your ears. There's no depth. There's no range. And it's not how music actually sounds in a room. I like stuff where you kind of hear the room, especially rock music. Like, you hear the band in a room, kind of, and there's like this. You hear the silence too. It's kind of like seeing the canvas, again, to relate to something visual. You have to stop me. You have to stop me. Stop me, because I'm getting into the music, the audio nerd thing.
Hey, but one other element of it too, which kind of goes back to my personal pushback against all of the AI and just the robots and everything in general. Something that has to be considered is I don't want a robot to do that for me. It's kind of like autocorrect. Like, autocorrect pisses me off because it's, you know what I mean? It's always there. Just, it's like, no, that's what I want to say. No, that's what I'm trying to do. That's kind of what all of these, in the musical world it's all over the place. It's in film and all these other areas is, sometimes the best you actually, like, for instance, David Gilmour talking about, Wish You Were Here. I heard this somewhere. He was saying that not Wish You Were Here, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, that riff, that main riff of Shine On You Crazy Diamond was a mistake.
Pink Floyd, everybody. Pink Floyd,
yeah. It was a mistake. Like, he didn't mean to do that. You know what I mean?
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like, he was messing around. I've done that too, is where you just accidentally, you create something new, and you're like, wait a second, that was actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then
I've heard of this happening. Bands will get together and they'll just start making random noises until they hear something good.
and the thing is,
that's all I write songs, man.
Exactly. And if you become dependent on the technology or AI or whatever, that's my concern, is people becoming dependent on these things, not even just in the art world, but that's obviously very personal.
Well, we might see a sort of a re-emphasis on acoustic and sort of genuine music and art in that sense. Maybe AI will cause people to crave genuine art again. Who knows?
I think we're already kind of seeing that, because there has been so much just technological manipulation of music for so long. I think we're already at a point where, just like what we were just talking about, and I think that goes into other areas too. But I think that's generally, even in other spheres, not just artistic, but my concern is it takes away people's dignity. Like, oh, well, a robot does that for you now, so you're going to just get UBI. It's like, I think that people's dignity has to come, the human dignity of being able to take care of yourself. I think that's going to have to come into the equation. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the Kurt Vonnegut book Player Piano, but it kind of, and I know there's a lot of dystopian and some utopian novels who talk about this kind of thing, but it's interesting, Player Piano, right? A piano that it plays itself. But in that book, basically, the engineers and the people who run all the technology are like the most powerful people in society, and all of the plebes, or the people who are not playing those roles, they all basically get a stipend from the government, like a UBI. And they live over on the other side of the river and all just kind of like live like really bland lives where they, just all drink all day or whatever. And,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not very optimistic about that. I think taking away people's ability to fend for themselves, I think that is a necessity for people to have that connection to their own struggle in a way. So anyway, just when I was listening to you guys talk about that earlier, it all ties into the musical element, but also just generally just existence. I think it's important for people to understand that, which is good that people are getting more back towards like farming, and you got a lot of people doing like homesteading and stuff. I think that's good because
it's amazing. There's a huge shift towards that again. It's like everybody wants to own a plot of land out in the middle of nowhere and have a big forest around them and have like a small sort of ranch home or whatever. I mean, you're sort of seeing, it's almost like people are kind of and you see this on like Tumblr too, right? Tumblr is sort of the thing that all young girls kind of get into for images. And one of the major things that is promoted on Tumblr is like these images of farm life and farm homes and living. And it's kind of an indication that maybe people are kind of shifting away from like suburbia and wanting to have some sort of some genuine connection with the land, and also tendency toward family life and things like that. But one of the things that I was going to mention, I was thinking about earlier, was my theory that Hollywood, and in particular like script writers, are having a huge effect on relationships, human relationships, and what people expect in relationships. So, when people watch television and movies growing up, they get what's the word? They get an impression of how people should react to certain scenarios and certain situations based on what the script writers wrote as the reaction. So like in a romance or whatever, the woman will say something and then the man will have the perfect response, right? He'll know exactly what to say in that moment, right? That'll make her feel good. And I think what that does is that programs young women to believe that that's the way a man should make her feel, and like you should have this perfect reaction.
We're all that suave all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like it's sort of like Hollywood basically sets this insane. People talk about. It's funny because I remember like in the 90s and then the 2000s there was this big talk about unrealistic expectations for women's bodies, right? But the truth is that that's not what the unrealistic expectations were about. The unrealistic expectations were really about the people's reactions to things, right? It's because script writers have all the time in the world to come up with perfect reactions and responses to events and statements. And so as a result, in the real world, when you're faced with a real human being in a real scenario, you don't have a perfect comeback. And so this creates this psychological condition where people think, well, why isn't my life like in the movies? Why isn't you're thinking this? You're not thinking this consciously, of course. You're thinking this on a subconscious level. You're thinking, well, why isn't my spouse or why isn't why aren't my friends reacting like I want them to react at this moment? And I think that creates this kind of this distance between people that used to not exist. When before we had Hollywood and before we had motion pictures, people didn't have these kind of expectations of how people should react. Now they do, and I think that's part of the reason that we see, higher divorce rates and things like that.
I will say that, I was going to make a Ripple joke. I won't do that. I always have the right thing to say, except for right now. I do have a question, though, for Carl, and it's something that I have found distressing. What I'm going to do is, I know Eke has stepped away for a moment. I'm going to bring him at least his avatar, if it's there, his avatar forward, and then when he returns, he can join the conversation. But my question is for Carl right now, and that is, I have lamented over the years that we're never really going to be able to have this futuristic world that we had hoped for, where we press buttons and then everything goes well, our desires are met, and the door will shut when we tell it to, and the dishwasher will stop when we order it to, all of this sort of thing. And the reason why, of course, is the invasion of privacy. It seems impossible to really keep out somebody, government, somebody really bright at universities, whoever. We can think of a couple anti-white organizations that would love to be able to get into every device that can listen and look at you in your home if you care about white people. So how does our expectation of this futuristic world that has been such a part of Western man's imagination for our future? I mean, we can all think back to how there used to be these claims 40 years ago, 50 years ago, where they would say, well, 40, 50 years from now, there'll be flying cars. And maybe there would have been, if we hadn't had to harmonize the diversity and waste trillions in dollars and an uncountable amount of genius, effort, industry, etc., on trying to harmonize different biospirits, which has never been possible throughout the history of man. So perhaps we would have flying cars, and yet still we would be faced with this phenomenon. Privacy is not only for criminals. And so how do you see, do we ever reach the world where we do have the door that shuts when we tell it to, or do we just never get there? Because if the door can be smart enough to do that, or the dishwasher smart enough to listen to us, well, then it's going to be smart enough for others to get inside of it and then listen and look at everything we're doing.
This is something, the issue of privacy is something that I think that the pro-white movement, and I was about to say like the right, but we're technically not necessarily the right. We need to own this, right? Like the other, our political enemies are going to be very interested in normalizing spying on people, right? And they already do it, of course. And this is something that I was thinking about earlier today. I was thinking like, all this business about like conspiracy theories and Alex Jones and things like that. Really, I noticed, I was thinking about when did the point come when conspiracy theorists were suddenly taken seriously, or so-called conspiracy theorists? And I think that the point shifted. The turning point was when Edward Snowden came out and basically told everybody, I work for the NSA, and I can tell you with definitive proof that the US government is in fact spying on everyone, recording phone conversations, recording private chats, everything like that. Prior to Edward Snowden coming out and saying that, it was, if somebody had said that who was not, didn't have firsthand knowledge of it, they would have been considered an absolute kook, So it was really that point that I think that everything changed, where you had all of these, I don't want to say like every conspiracy theory, but I think that there was a huge amount of credence that was given to people who were saying things that were previously considered too outlandish to be true. And I think that's a great thing, right? Like, I mean, I know there's a lot of people on our side who don't want to be associated with conspiracy theorists and who want to try to distance themselves. But the fact of the matter is that, even though many of these conspiracies are obviously not true, the general trend of skepticism toward the elites and the general trend towards belief in elite, I won't use the word conspiracy, but elite planning, so to speak, is a great thing for our side. Like, we should want more and more people to believe that the elites, because it's true. I mean, it's obviously true, right? They're obviously planning things behind our back. They do this in places like Davos and Bilderberg meetings and things like that. So that's a good thing, in my opinion. I think that the future, though, as far as like technology goes, I think that technology is actually going to improve on this. And I think, one of the stupidest things that anybody ever did, in my opinion, was to buy those Amazon or Alexa devices, that like you put in your home. It's like a little speaker, or one of those Google speakers that you can speak to and it'll tell you the weather. It's like, well, who cares if it tells you the weather or cuts your lights off? I mean, you can do that yourself. You've basically put a microphone that's always on listening. That's incredibly foolish. You should never want to do that. I think in the future, though, we'll have ways to detect microphones and disable them, and also cameras and speakers and things like that. So I'm not, I think in the medium term it might be a problem, but in the future maybe not so much. I'm a little bit more optimistic about that.
Let's bring in Eke, and brother, you've been listening for quite a little while. What are your thoughts? What are the first things that come to mind?
I guess the first thing that comes to mind is brush and floss your teeth. Let's see, what else? Yeah, actually, the whole thing with
always.
Yeah, it's very important.
Wash behind your ears.
That's right. That's right. Clean your room. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with the conspiracy theory thing, and like, I mean, the word itself is weaponized now. Weirdly, I've actually been I went to a place earlier today. No kidding. It was a restaurant that I frequent, and I know the owner. He's a good guy, but he's a conservative. Now here in Los Angeles, that's a really, really big deal. And he was talking with someone about something, and a customer heard the owner and gave a 1-star review and called him a conspiracy theorist. You believe that? That's crazy talk. Calling people conspiracy theorists used to be meaningful. Now it's not. Now it's no different than racist. It's no different than poopy head or stupid face. It doesn't mean anything anymore. The weird thing is, like, all these words and terms don't even mean anything anymore. So it's just, it's something that you use to announce an attack, and that's about it. As for the AI itself being a wonderful summoned demonic presence in our life, I kind of agree with that. Side note, I was listening to some of the stuff you're talking about with like AI generated media, and I don't know if anyone here has done this, but go and look up, I think it's like neural net, Rick Astley or something. It's the song Never Gonna Give You Up. I swear it's the weirdest thing. They threw it into a neural net processor to see what would happen. And it generated randomized versions of Never Gonna Give You Up. So help me, a couple of them were actually pretty cool.
Okay, how does this work, neural net processor?
As far as I know, I know very, very little about it, but if I recall correctly, this is the basis for all those creepy Google portraits, by the way. It's fundamentally the same technology. And if I recall correctly, what they're trying to do is get a computer to mimic what neurons would do in a brain. That's the basic premise. This is a strictly materialistic view of reality and consciousness. And the idea is that your mind, your consciousness, is a byproduct of clever arrangements of matter and energy. And if they can replicate the arrangement of matter and energy, they can replicate a mind. That's the supposition. That's the assertion. And it looks as though
I have some insight into this, but yeah, you can continue.
Oh, I'll be happy to hear it. I'll be done in just a second anyway. It's not that big of a deal. It's kind of interesting. The banks of fake neural networks in the computers, as far as I know, is getting complex enough that they can start to generate things from it. That's what I understand, but I don't know that much about it. It's just one of those curiosities from my standpoint. But go on, please.
Wait. But before Carl speaks, I don't mean to cut you off, Carl. I just want to make sure I understand and the chat understands. And by the way, chat, this is the kind of stuff you get on It's Late Night Somewhere. So it's late night talk. You know, this is what we talk about late at night. And let us know how you like that. But how is that not programming something to sound like Rick Astley's iconic 1980s song, Never Gonna Give You Up? How is it creating it if it's not programming it?
To be honest, I don't know.
Okay.
I know very little about how that would work.
I can tell you, I can give you some insight as to how they work. I read a lot of these academic papers on neural networks. So basically what they're doing is they've got something called a GAN, which stands for Generative Adversarial Network. And so what it is basically they have two different programs. One program's job is to create an output, and the other program's job is to try to detect the difference between the output and something real. So based on so essentially what's happening is the two programs are are fighting with each other. One of them is trying to trick the other one, and the other one's trying to get better at determining which is the fake and which one is the real. And so when you pit these two programs against each other, they eventually get better and better and better at solving their own respective problems. And the final output is a program that is essentially impossible to discriminate or determine between a real output and a fake output. It's so realistic. And so a GAN, or a generative adversarial network, is the sort of the foundation of most neural networks. But what's happening is that the computer is sort of in a weird way, it's programming itself. So it's got you've got like a dozen or so different variables, and what it does is it'll tweak each variable a little bit in each iteration. And so you'll have different layers of variables, and you have 3 or 4 layers. And at the end, the output, which could be anything, it could be a picture, it could be a movement, it could be a sound. The output will go up against this other program, which tries to determine if it's a fake or not. And so until it can beat that other program, it's going to continue to tweak these variables, these random variables. And so this random tweaking of different variables ends up, essentially the computer ends up programming itself. And it takes time, and it takes a lot of processing power. You need like a very expensive hardware to do it, and a lot of electricity. But at the end of it, you end up with a set of weights. So all these different variables are given different weights and biases. And once you achieve a certain correct weight and bias for each variable, then you have your finished neural network. And that's also essentially how Tesla program its cars to drive themselves, is because And when people talk about this stuff, the programmers themselves acknowledge that they don't know how the networks can do this. And this is what makes it kind of creepy in a sense, because it's almost like there's a ghost. Because what happens is sometimes the computer will figure out solutions to problems that humans had never thought of before. And a great example of this is in chess. So, they have this thing called AlphaGo, which is a neural network that got really good at chess. And the way it got good at chess was by playing against itself. It just continually played against itself through millions and millions of games. And it played these games, of course, each game probably lasted, less than a second. But after millions of games, it finally became better than any human programmed chess algorithm prior. And so but what's cool about it is that the chess and the Chinese Go board game and those types of things, the computer will make moves that don't make any rational sense to a human. Right? Like it'll make moves that are actually bad in a way that a human would never do, like a chess grandmaster would never do himself. But in the context of the game, the final outcome is always that the computer wins. So it's bizarrely good at what it does. And this is the reason that I think that like people who say that, oh, we'll never have self-driving cars or that's going to take decades to come. No. Self-driving cars are just around the corner. It's only a short matter of time, within 1 or 2 years, before cars can drive themselves better than humans can.
Is it neural in the sense that, from what you're describing, it's essentially this ping-ponging notion or motion that you're describing? It's learning, and is it that it's almost you're programming it to then passively actively, but I meant passive in that we're not doing anything to engender this, and that it's learning? Because when Eke started explaining this, he said that it mimics how they think our human neural pathways work. So
it starts out a blank slate, and then you give it an input, and you say, okay, this is what you're supposed to act like. This is the outcome we want. And from that blank slate state, it starts out essentially as a baby, right? It starts out making all sorts of mistakes and doing stupid things and losing the game over and over. And over time, over millions of iterations, it gets better and better. And so this is why, if you've ever seen like when you were asked to do a CAPTCHA, and it asks you to prove that you're not a robot, one of the things that it always does is that it'll ask you to choose between, it'll say like, okay, choose the picture that contains cars, or the picture that contains a train, or the picture that contains bicycles, or whatever, right? Those questions are there to help program these generative adversarial networks, because every time a human picks out, certain items within pictures, it's giving feedback to the network saying, this is how you should have responded to the question. And it's teaching these networks, how to drive a car, essentially. Now, what's interesting about this, though, is that it's what you would call like a black box. We don't know. In other words, somebody is not specifically programming it to stay within certain lines or whatever. It's figuring that out on its own. But it's not conscious, right? There's no consciousness involved. It's just all it is it's entirely a mathematical deterministic thing. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I mean, and it's really sort of the future. As far as technologies go, like neural networks and Bitcoin are really the two biggest ones. Like neural networks are going to revolutionize. And you can almost think of it like if you've ever watched a baby trying to reach out and grab something or manipulate an object, the baby will sometimes kind of miss. They'll have to move their hand a few times to kind of get the target. Well, that's exactly what the computer is doing. It's going to miss a bunch of times, and then eventually it'll get the target. And once it gets the target, it gets kind of the muscle memory of how to do it. But it's leading to a scenario where you're going to have far, far higher unemployment. and not just the lower classes, right? In fact, actually, I think that the lower classes are actually going to be many of those types of jobs are going to be salvaged. It's going to be the sort of the middle managerial types who sort of, do kind of middle office work that are really going to lose their jobs, because those are the easiest jobs to replace, by artificial intelligence.
Accountants, BTFO.
Yeah. And, like human resources and just garbage like that.
Well, they'll say human resources are some kind of essential work, and that they're deeming who deserves to rightfully work there and all that kind of thing.
Right.
Talking about the ghost in the machine, there's one weird. I don't know. Did you watch any of the analysis of what was it, the chess playing one?
Yeah. I watched. Well, there was that one, and there was also the Chinese Go. There's a board game. I think it's Chinese. I'm pretty sure it's Chinese.
It's Chinese.
It's called Go, and they have it's a really interesting game because it's super simple to learn how to play. But basically, all you're doing is you take turns placing colored pieces on a board, and the goal of the game is to try to create a circle of pieces that encompasses your opponent's pieces. Because once you complete a circle, you capture all of your opponent's pieces within that circle. And it sounds super simple, but when you've got two humans playing against each other, trying to encircle each other's pieces, it becomes super challenging and extremely, as far as it's way more complex than chess, because you can't just teach a computer how to do this. It's almost like a difficult skill to learn versus chess, which is a little bit more deterministic.
Did you watch any of the ones on the chess one though?
I think I watched the original alpha. I forgot what they called the chess one, but they live streamed it on YouTube. It was pretty entertaining. But yeah, the chess, it's the artificial intelligence. We've already had computer programs which could beat even the greatest chess grandmaster, right? Those have already existed. They existed for decades. In fact, they existed back when Gary Kasparov was playing against IBM's Deep Blue.
I don't know, man. He seemed to call out that there may have been some shenanigans going on there.
but see, when you put the best traditional chess programs up against alpha, which is the artificial intelligence version, it just doesn't stand a chance. The Alpha Go completely destroys it. It's incredible. I mean, and to watch the game, what's fascinating about it is I've read this. I'm not a great chess player myself, but I've seen what chess grandmasters say is that they study these games, because the games, when the computers are playing against each other, they're making moves that humans would never think to make. I mean, it's just really crazy what they're able to do.
Well, I actually recommend you find, there's this one, I can't remember her name, but there's this chick who's into chess, and I think she's like Russian or something like that, blonde chick. And she does an analysis of, what's it called? Alpha Zero? I think that's the one. Yeah. She puts Alpha Zero against what was one of the better chess programs, and she had the two play each other. And the weirdest thing popped up. The Alpha Zero, the moves that it made, I mean, yeah, you're completely right. They were just freaking, I mean, they looked like jihadist suicide attacks. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And
its moves was making moves that you're not supposed to make.
Yes. Well, here's the weird thing, though. The way, one of the move sequences ended up with Alpha Zero had less material than the opponent, but all of the opponent's material was either pinned or blocked. And this opened up AlphaZero to do everything and anything it wanted with the remaining pieces.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And the thing that struck me about it, somebody made mention of this, is that the style of play almost seemed malicious. It actually almost seemed to have like a psychological component. Very weird.
Like it was a cat playing with a mouse or something.
Yeah.
Jason, I'm having flashbacks to the talk we had with JF when we had him on. Actually, we spoke to him twice, but one of the times we did this weird thing where we continued our interview, our part 2, on his show. But when his book, The Revolutionary Phenotype, came out, he was talking about mechanisms that, from what I'm picking up with what you two are saying, and I'm not familiar with this Chinese game Go. I'm not familiar with some of the things you're talking about. It's the first time I'm hearing about it. But JF's book was a warning against gene replication, in that the machinery would be learning on its own and then thinking ahead, as you're kind of describing. Because when you say that these chess programs are making moves that humans wouldn't make, maybe there's more going on. But at first blush, and in my layman's mind, I'm thinking to myself, I suppose that the computer just sees so many moves ahead that even a chess grandmaster wouldn't be able to see, that to a human mind it would appear, quote unquote, irrational. But of course, if the end result is that the computer wins and it accomplishes the task that it had set out to do, then by definition it is rational if it wins the game. And that, so again, JF's book was a lot about this same mechanism, if I'm picking this up right, but in the context that he talked about, of course, again, was this gene editing or gene replication kind of technology. Do you remember that, Jason? And do you think that that's the same kind of thing that's going on, where the computer, these, not that there's a consciousness there, but that in a crass way, that the computers the technology is learning enough where it's then so many steps ahead of us, where it could kind of outwit us, and we feel like we're playing against, or we're pitted against something, as Carl and Ecke are saying, that's actually malicious, and it appears to have a consciousness, even though it doesn't really.
Yes, certainly within the bounds of the game or context, whatever it has been programmed within which to operate. And it sounds to me like the steps that are apparently illogical may actually be a consequence of the machine's ability not necessarily to forecast a particular move. Well, it certainly wouldn't be to forecast that a particular move would emotionally disrupt or whatever a competitor, but that whatever move it made, it would be able to compute the remaining moves against the remaining pieces to win the match. And whatever game or whatever machine could do that better than the other would be able to win every single match. So in any particular move itself is in its isolation insignificant, and to the machine insignificant, because every decision is left to the subsequent moves. This is where, of course, the big difference lies, is that human beings have to create for these machines the contexts in which they're going to operate, or what we're referring to here as learning.
Right.
Please, yeah, go ahead.
Right. I was going to say, like, you can't, like, this is the thing about general artificial intelligence, right? So there's artificial intelligence, which is just like very specific tasks, right? Just win the game of chess. It's super simple. But general artificial intelligence is like where it's almost like you have to have an awareness of the entire world and everything around you all the time. And it's like, it's something that only a human currently can do. we might get to the point where we have general artificial intelligence. This is something similar to like, Data from Star Trek or whatever. And that's, that would be problematic, mainly in my view, because I think that it would, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Her. There's a movie called Her, where the guy essentially falls in love with an electronic device that's producing a voice, a woman's voice. And
starring Joaquin Phoenix, who also played the Joker, right?
Yeah, it's him.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like him though, because he's got the mustache.
I haven't seen it, but I've heard reference.
You should see, it's a pretty good movie. Yeah, you should see it. But it's really interesting because it's, it makes you realize that I think that this is on the horizon. I think you already kind of see it in Japan, and with some young men will claim that they're in love with computer game character or something like that, right? And I think that as these artificial characters become more and more realistic in their reactions and responses, that we could see people get sidetracked and become attracted to them and sort of lose their incentive to develop real relationships with real people. Regardless, though, we are headed
that would certainly be the next step of what you were talking about with the Hollywood scripts.
Yeah. I mean, I think, well, here's my thinking. You see, like, even with the non-whites that are being flooded into America and Europe, their fertility rate plummets when they arrive in the West, right? So it's not, I don't want to make people what's the word, stop worrying about this, but it is true. I mean, it's the fact that if you look at the fertility rate of like recent immigrants, it does plummet once they enter Western nations. And frankly, except for maybe like, India and African nations, fertility rate everywhere across the entire world is already, below replacement level. So the future is, in my view, probably going to trend, more rural. We're headed toward a lower global population generally, but especially because certain African nations just can't. They're not going to be able to maintain population. So you combine that with the fact that we have these technologies, not just birth control, but also psychological birth control, which is like I said, computers mimicking humans, so that people get sidetracked and create relationships with computers rather than people. We already, in fact, now that I think about it, we already kind of see that today with the internet, because there's a lot of people, a lot of young men will get into relationships with women, real women who are hundreds of miles or thousands of miles away from them, rather than focusing on women who were close by. And I think that might also be part of the reason we see reduced family formation today, because of the internet making it seem as though people are more accessible at a distance, long distance relationships. So that's another thing we have to contend with. And I think that one of the ways that we could contend with that, that I'm kind of hopeful for, is that I'm hoping we see, and I remember reading an article about this recently occurring in Japan. Somebody had created a program or an application that was able to predict who would make a really good couple, like who would get along with each other and be attracted to each other, right? And I think that that's really going to be one of the big applications of AI going forward, is that it would save people an enormous amount of time and energy and effort if you could just press a button and have a computer tell you, okay, these are your top 10 closest, your most likely romantic partners within 100 miles of where you live, right? That would be incredible, right? It would save everybody an enormous amount of time dating, and it would also maximize the likelihood that a relationship would be lasting. So I think that's one area that's not really been explored enough, and I think it's something that we should have to look forward to, I think.
I'm going to go on the record and say that's actually a reasonable application for the AI. That's the one time when I'll say, okay, there's something there.
Yeah.
See, my first reaction is I'm kind of bristling at it, and I'm wondering to inject a whole different kind of fold into this conversation is, Carl, you seem a little more optimistic about a lot of this stuff than most people I speak to in what I do here. And I'm wondering do you ultimately see the technology itself, and this I guess relates to what Jason, it's in a similar spirit to something Jason asked earlier. Is it kind of the technology is going to iron itself out? Or is a part of you concerned about the human element? It's a tough thing, but people have their different perceptions on it, and it's controversial. But the spiritual or transcendent element, I believe, just stating it very briefly, that we do have a faculty that makes us search for and also be open to realities, let's say, that are non-physical.
Right.
And that to be a whole human being, and especially I can only speak to being someone of the West, our art and our instincts seem to betray a drive towards that developed consciousness. And I believe that there is something to, whether it's in older social structures or Greek philosophies, or you find it in all kinds of iterations, kind of this triad of mind, body, spirit. And that there's the physical organism that we have, there's the mental plane of our thoughts or how we even communicate emotions. If you want to make this broad umbrella of like the psyche, encapsulating both our intellect and our emotions. But there's something even more nebulous, as I was saying, the spiritual. We have a faculty. Some traditions call it the nous, N-O-U-S. We see that in ancient Greek. Also, in a bit of a different context, in a Christian context, I believe the Eastern Orthodox use that term. I'm a little rusty on that, but Jason and I did a show with someone who is Eastern Orthodox back in August. And I believe that we do have something that drives us towards that. And again, I'm speaking generally because I know people have different religious beliefs, and I'm not saying anything's out of bounds. Certainly nothing's out of bounds in this conversation, but I don't want to get lost in the weeds too much, at least in my opening parlay into this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I get very concerned that when people have conversations like this and nothing of the spiritual, nothing of the transcendent is injected into it, it becomes this very cold, mechanistic, deterministic way of just dealing with things. We're just going to solve this technology with more technology and more technology and more technology. And I don't know, I have a different kind of orientation towards life. Very, I have a poet's mind and soul, and I wouldn't want AI telling me which woman within a 50-mile radius of me is most compatible based on this. I believe that my own consciousness and my own intention will guide me to her. And if I'm as authentic a man as I can be, then I'll create that magnetism and the waves out energetically into my life that will attract her to me. And then maybe someone could say, well, the technology is just one more way to do that. It's just one tool you could use in that. And all right, we could get into the nitty gritty on that. But even if we have that conversation, at least it's after I've injected, again, this element of the consciousness into it. And so just because we're all getting to know each other, and Carl, I haven't spoken to you about this kind of thing before. Where does that play into things with you in your life?
Personally, I am kind of already had success in that field. But the way I think of things is, like I said, I'm generally, I think my own inclination is always to be sort of more optimistic toward as far as technology goes. And the reason is just because I think of things in terms of like, how would somebody a long time ago, if you brought somebody from the past to the present, what would their reaction be to, the way we live today? And I think that, for somebody far into the past, today would be horrific in some ways, but also really, really heavenly in other ways, right? It's gonna always be kind of a mixed bag in that way. And so I think that's what we're headed toward in the future, right? The future is always going to be a mixed bag. It's not going to be purely dystopian or purely heavenly, right? There's going to be aspects of it that are both. So, but I get what you're saying. I think that
I agree with the mix. I definitely hear you on the whole. If we theoretically had someone from the past look to now, I get what you're saying. Right. What I'm saying is when there are periods in history, though, and there are attempts at this purely mechanistic utopian order, right, where a lot of people, look at the Soviet era, all kinds of things in our recent past, a lot of people suffer horrendous fates because of this leap that people try to make to create this so-called utopia that purely is based on the mechanistic or the rational, whatever you want to say, the technological in our age, and eschews the
spiritual,
the soulfulness of us. I'm not even saying religious, although I know people have, again, strong feelings about religion, but maybe soulfulness is a good word.
No, I totally agree with you. I think I think the 20th century was all about technology making the world what's the word? Not mechanistic, but sort of industrial, right? The 20th century was all about, it was the culmination of, the industrial technology affecting human culture. And it really hit home with World War I and World War II, right? With the two world wars were sort of, those were the things that made people realize that we were entering into a new phase of human existence where war was no longer something that was like this noble thing that people would, send their sons off to, and then they would come back or, either victorious or not. It was really industrial killing, right? And not only that, but also industrial destruction of culture too, right? Because that's what happened in Europe, right? Europe after World War I in particular, but also World War II. You saw just like this enormous destruction of European culture. So my thinking is that we hopefully, fingers crossed, the 21st century will be sort of an answer to the 20th century in the sense that it'll be like people will be saying, well, let's try to use technology to fulfill human desires in such a way that it preserves our natural inclination toward spiritual fulfillment, right? Like you want to be not just fulfilled with as far as like money and physical objects and things like that. We can do that now with mass production. What we really need is we really need happiness. We need some way to measure happiness and also to measure and maximize people's ability to feel personal fulfillment in life. Now I know the way I say it is probably kind of scary sounding to religious people, because the idea of like measuring happiness or measuring spirituality, but I'm sort of kind of halfway. I have one foot in the transhumanist position, because I do think that there is a case to be made for using technology to improve human life in a way beyond just like the physical. And I think that hopefully, like I said, hopefully that's what the 21st century will be about. We can aim for that. We could try for that with like AI and drugs and things like that. And that's another story. I've gotten into debates with people about using drugs to improve happiness and things like that. But that's
I'm curious too. I know these are huge questions, but how the sense of the political then enters into it for you, because I would tend to be more optimistic with you if there were at least some cultures in the Western world that had. I'm not one of these people that gets up and says, well, this is the perfect political system, but I always tend towards the holistic and the organic. And so I think that any kind of nation, and if it's a nation state that's people contained within national boundaries that are appropriate for the populations we currently see of tens of millions of people, that there is a through line. There's a through line from all the classes, from the working classes to the merchant classes, intellectual classes to the leadership classes, that they are of a similar stock, and that's why so much of what we do is focused on peoplehood. They feel like they share a common root and a common destiny, and that nothing's ever going to be perfect. Nobody is under the delusion that leaders never take advantage of their power or anything like that. But at least there's a hell of a lot more cohesion and sense of a national story. And sometimes I try not to be too highfalutin about it. And I try to put out these little quips on Twitter that'll get people thinking. So I'll say things like this sometimes to bring it down to earth. It's like, what's a healthy nation? Well, it's when every class and when every level of intelligence is reading their kids the same bedtime stories every night. We don't have that in our Western countries. We don't even have that. Yeah. So I would be, and of course those bedtime stories would be obviously myths from their own culture with characters that look like them and lessons that are germane to them. Eke was just on the show I do with John Bruce Leonard, and we talked all about narrative and myth, and it's something we're going to continue talking about because we're all fascinated by it. We think it's a key towards reawakening people. But huge topic. There's no way to sum it up in a couple of minutes, but children's entertainment is key.
That's all I'll say.
Oh yeah. And I know Eke we all have thoughts on that, but I'm just saying I have a hard time being optimistic, not because of the technology as such. Not to say, I think all of us could and should have very deep critical questions about it. But even if I were to be convinced about the technology as such, and understand that there's an element where it's inevitable, this is the way it's going. I get that. Unless a meteor hits the Earth, this this is the trajectory that we're on. I get it. But I guess I'll put it, we're men. I'll put it to you in a challenging way. How can you be this optimistic when we have the leaders that we have? I don't trust because the elites with all of these technologies.
Yeah. Because I don't view our situation I don't view the current order as remotely sustainable, right? It's just not. And the reason I say that is because I'm looking at it from a economist's financial perspective, right? What I see for the first time in 1,000 years, we have trillions of dollars worth of negative yielding debt. Now I know for people who don't understand finance, that doesn't mean much, but essentially what it means is that governments around the world, and in particular, Western governments, but also China and Japan and others, they have essentially built their economies on a house of cards. And the way things are going, you've got all of this negative yielding debt. You've got central banks driving interest rates down constantly. You've got enormous government debts that are piling up, and interest rates can't go up, because if interest rates do go up a little bit, 1 or 2%, it's all over. They can't pay the interest payments on it anymore. So what I'm seeing is that, normally, even like a loan, just by itself, that situation is not sustainable. You're going to have a correction, and the correction is going to be enormous. But what I'm seeing is that on top of that, we have the introduction of a new technology, which is Bitcoin, which essentially is like releasing a lion into a pen full of gazelles, right? When you have a currency that is not possible to dilute, at that point, it's game over. And we're starting to see it now. That's the reason Bitcoin is going up so rapidly, is we're seeing Bitcoin essentially absorbing and eating all of this capital. And over the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be a bloodbath. All this money is going to go into Bitcoin. Now that provides us with an opportunity, but also what it does is it totally changes the playing field, so that the current batch of elites are inhibited in a way that they weren't before, because now they've got to contend with a currency that they don't control, that they cannot inflate, and that even if they get a lot of it, it doesn't matter, because they're going to have to spend it to maintain their status and their position within society. And spending Bitcoin means you've got to figure out a way to earn it back. You've got to be profitable, and these guys aren't profitable, right? The situation as it stands is not profitable. They're bringing in dependents, millions and millions of dependents from the third world. The current population, the existing population of Western nations, is aging. So those people are not going to be producing tax revenue. I mean, and then, like I said, you've got the AI situation coming up, which is going to destroy millions of jobs, right? So what I see coming is a huge reset. Now, I don't think it's going to happen all at once. I think that this will play out over a period of 1 to 2 decades, but it's going to end up with the George Soros types and the globalist types. They're just not going to be taken seriously anymore. They're just not going to have the resources that they had previously. I think that they've peaked. They've already peaked.
May I come in and address this?
We would love to. I just want to say, Carl, I'm glad we've talked about all this, because I'm getting underneath the tip of the iceberg and understanding why, not just as a financial tool, but the deeper reasons as to why you're into Bitcoin. So it's really rounding that out. It's very interesting. But Oliver Semiagog, welcome. And what say you, my friend?
Well, hello, gentlemen. In all friendliness and without any aggressiveness, I would be very, very careful to envision such a bright future. Granting, of course, the point that was made earlier about how naturally you're going to have a mix of both good and bad. Strikingly good, so novel in many respects, perhaps, that it seems like a great blessing, but inevitably the nature of everything that occurs here in manifestation carries with it some piece of, the yin and the yang, as someone was saying earlier about how these elements come together. But I hesitate to credit the idea that those same elites who have consistently employed technology and funded it, people like Westinghouse, people hiring Thomas Edison, people putting Tesla to work, and then perhaps doing all kinds of nefarious things with his ideas and running off with them after the fact. I hesitate to credit the idea that the emergence of these various technological changes, that they will somehow simply render people like Soros, irrelevant, that somehow they won't be taken seriously anymore, and that these people cannot ride a wave from their current, efflorescences of power into this new domain. I mean, even the assumption that they don't have a role in the creation of things like Bitcoin, Where did it come from? We have all kinds of myths and stories about, a Satoshi or something. I can't even remember the damn names, but, it just came from somewhere. And certainly because they move in the darkness, they must certainly have our best interest at heart. I mean, I took a look at, what's his name? Elon Musk, recently putting tweets out, about the whole business of doing transactions online. Why do you need gold anyway? It's just a marker, and this is far more efficient. And I'm thinking to myself, this billionaire at the top of, near the top of the billionaire heap, if not, approaching it, doubtless he has all our best interest in mind, because he's just that sort of visionary. That primary among his motivations is our best interests as he construes them, and then you have the idea of the centralization of control and power. I mean, it's like a doomsday book. You remember, what's his name? William the Conqueror heads in, takes over Britain, and within a few short years of defeating the Anglo-Saxons, his Norman regime goes out and counts every object in the kingdom down to every last chicken. And it's recorded in the book we call the Domesday Book. Mm-hmm. And so we have this centralization of power. We have this centralization of all these resources. And, you could talk about the freedom that Bitcoin lends you, but what are you going to do with it when the power goes out? And you can argue, of course, that, that would never happen. That some aspect of the interwebs must remain. But, revolution and war and apocalypse and catastrophe, or even the malicious shutting down of your access to any kind of a network within a given area. To me, it seems in many respects to be like the all-seeing eye of Sauron. The let's call them the commies, the utopians, those who endlessly seek to centralize control. They've been frustrated in every respect through the past, insofar as they do their communistic experiments. And we have memes about it where we say, that wasn't communism, sure it wasn't, it's never been real communism thus far. The idea of this technology, this degree of granularity and everything that can be gathered together, it holds out the promise for that sort, for that type. It holds out such promise for them that now they actually can claim that maybe this time it could be real communism. It could be real social engineering. It could be the utopianism that carries us off into the holy land of transhumanism, the heavenly Jerusalem, whatever it is. And while I recognize that this position is hardly new, I'm simply articulating an instinctive position that a lot of people have. So I'm not laying claim to, appearing before you with some new damning information, but I do think that given these things that I've pointed out, there's room for perhaps pausing and taking a deep breath before embracing these things. Of course, recognizing that maybe we don't have a choice about them coming one way or another.
Yeah, I don't. Well, no. I take everything you say with in a good way. I mean, it's not. I don't view that as aggressive in any way, because I think that that's a legitimate position. I mean, obviously, you need to be skeptical of everything that comes your way, including Bitcoin. What I would say though is that Bitcoin is, in my view anyway, fundamentally anti-communist, because it is, the fact that it's not possible to inflate it, and the fact that it's not possible to prevent transactions from occurring, those two things seem to indicate that the creator, whoever it was libertarian in some sense. And like I said, I think it was Nick Szabo, who is on record saying that his family, I don't know if it was his father or his grandfather, he cited as being somebody who suffered immensely under communism in Hungary. So his family are from Hungary, and they suffered under communism. And one of the reasons that he was so interested in creating a digital currency was that he wanted a way for people to be able to transport money outside of government auspices. So, if you go through a checkpoint, it's difficult to get through the checkpoint with gold or cash, because they'll search you, but with Bitcoin you can do that.
But of course, space doesn't matter when we're talking about the network, which is the very point you're making. But my question for you, since you know quite a bit about this, more than I do, quite a bit more than I do about this, what happens to Bitcoin without network connectivity?
So Bitcoin runs on, as you know, a blockchain, and the blocks are added every 10 minutes. So a new block is added every 10 minutes.
Sure, I'm talking about using it.
Right. So each block is only 2 megabytes, which in the grand scheme of things is a very tiny amount of information.
Right, but what do you do if you don't have any internet?
So if you don't have internet, you can actually, it is possible to transmit and receive blocks using shortwave radio. And so it's actually been shown that that's possible to do. So that's a worst case scenario. That's a scenario where you don't have internet at all.
Right, but you recognize that when you move to things like shortwave radio, you're of course dealing with the traditional realm of signals communication. And the minute that you appear doing any kind of a transmission, you light up the space that is under surveillance, for example. That's why preppers are big into getting radios and only listening, because the instant that they do any such thing, they can be pinpointed. I'm not saying, of course, that you have to imagine that the internet's going to go down, or that, for example, if you try to do something through shortwave radio, that you're going to be under surveillance. I'm just using that to underscore the point that the entire ecosystem within which this thing that many believe is sacrosanct and inviolable, or as close to it as we can get at present, the very ecosystem it operates in is absolutely controlled, or very close to that.
Yeah. I mean, but see, like, these kinds of arguments are kind of ridiculous, because it's like, you know, you could make the same argument. You could say, like, look, if you invest all of your money or your time into building a homestead with a farm where you grow your own food, somebody can come to your house and shoot you and take it. No problem, right? So, I mean, there's always an argument against investing in something. Right.
Sure, and I'm not here to talk specifically about Bitcoin, and in fact, that's one of my weakest areas. But what I'm emphasizing is that the entire picture that we're talking about here, I think, to me, and I'd love to hear an argument that convinced me otherwise. But it seems to me that there's an illusion of freedom. There's an example I use a lot talking about architecture. Certainly, Jared's heard it in the past, probably Jason. At the Charles de Gaulle Airport, and one of the older sections of it, there was this big innovation where they installed these clear tubes that are much like hamster, like Habitrail tubes, if you know what those are. They're the little plastic tubes that the hamsters scurry through in their little underground thing, but they're transparent, right? And this area and it actually goes up through this sort of open gallery space from one floor to another, and there are walkways. And it seems as though you're crossing this vast open space because sunlight's coming down from above, and you're sort of in this big cylinder of space, and you're walking through this tube and all the light's coming in. And there's this appearance that everything around you is open, when in fact you're going through a hamster tube of tightly constrained movement. And so, you know, not specifically with Bitcoin, I tend to think that it's the kind of trap that they used to catch monkeys with, where they put their hand into a jar and they grab something at the bottom of the jar that's too big for their fist to be withdrawn from the jar once they try to grip it. And of course, that requires something of value for people to put their hands in. Mind you, I believe a lot of people are going to make good money for a bit, because every trap has bait. But my point more generally is that you've got a framework of ever greater centralization and control. And that requires, to a considerable extent, that someone be at the center of it. And so, you know, the parallel of setting up a farm out in the forest and a homestead, and yes, marauders could come through. Hell, you could just have a tornado come through and wreck your double wide, right? So yes, absolutely, that holds the idea that anything could happen to anything. But in this specific case, we're talking about frameworks where we don't even know what the intelligence agencies are capable of relative to their reading of data, manipulation of that data in transit. You know, so while it may be that the encryption and these types of things that are available now are sufficient to thwart any attempt to do much with this operating within the existing networks. I mean, what's the window? I mean, particularly, I heard you talking earlier about, you know, the neural nets or neural processing or whatever the term was, and the advances that are coming in there. Typically we see that with every advance in a weapon, there's an advance in a defense. With every advance in a defense, there's an advance in a weapon. And yet all this time, the one thing that remains consistent is greater and greater centralization, which I hypothesize, again, I'd love to be proved wrong. I think that Bitcoin itself contributes to that idea of getting everyone onto the network. I used to joke because, they're not going to get rid of cash because politicians need to take bribes. But now increasingly, all these different countries, we've been pushed onto, working
Right.
with banking networks, credit cards, and the rest. So I imagine you see my point.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I think, no, your point about bribes is actually really interesting because I raised this point with Jared and Jason earlier on a previous podcast when we were talking about Bitcoin. I think that the fact that Bitcoin can be fairly anonymous and the fact that it's possible to send money to people without actually being in direct contact with them means that the elites or people who are out of power can use it to bribe or incentivize certain people to behave in ways that they would want them to behave. So Bitcoin is basically sort of the ideal money to convey a bribe or pay a spy, for instance, or something like that, right? Because you don't have to have a pile of cash. You don't have to leave it in a certain location where they have to go pick it up or whatever. So yeah, there's certain aspects of Bitcoin that make it sort of an interesting and useful tool for intelligence operations. Yeah, as far as like centralization goes, if you study the network and you see how it works, it doesn't strike me as something that would be easily manipulated or taken over, so to speak. In other words, it's the way it's constructed is that each block is sort of like a save point in a video game. So even in a worst case scenario where a government or something takes over Bitcoin and starts to have some sort of control over the network, you still have a permanent record of all the previous transactions up to that point.
Right.
So
and whatever the string is that's being mined and repeated.
Right. So in theory, even in a worst case scenario, you could create a fork where you have set up a different mining algorithm or something like that and say, okay, we're going to work our way from block number 600,000 or whatever on. And I think that most of the people who own Bitcoins and who were participating in Bitcoin prior to the takeover would probably agree to that new setup. So it's not something that we've had to deal with yet, but I mean, the closest we've come to that was really when there was a fork in 2017 where there was Bitcoin Cash was created. And, a lot of people were claiming that Bitcoin Cash would eventually replace Bitcoin, but we saw that what happened was that most people sold their Bitcoin Cash coins in order to buy more of the original Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin Cash died as an alternative, and the original Bitcoin has continued to go up because of network effects. But yeah, I mean, I think that there is a valid case to be made to be cautious with Bitcoin. Now, I say that sort of tongue in, like myself personally, I have like 99.9% of my net worth in Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I want to very swiftly add, I think a lot of people are going to make good money on it. I'm not sitting here saying
no. But see, like the reason I do is not because I did that intentionally. It's just because of, I've had it for so many years that it has ballooned to the point to where it's like, my other assets are essentially zilch, compared to it. But my own view on it, and it's a fairly strongly held view, is that it was created with libertarian intention in mind, and that it was not sort of a project of intelligence agencies or anything like that. I think that governments and intelligence agencies do benefit from it in roundabout ways. And one of the ways that they benefit from it is, like I said, it makes life easy for, paying spies and bribing people. But also it for a country with a reserve currency, in this case the U.S., you encounter something called the Triffin dilemma, which is in economics, it basically means that the country that produces the global reserve currency is in a weird way kind of at a disadvantage, because they end up sacrificing their local productive abilities, because they're essentially exporting their currency in lieu of exporting actual goods and services. And so what happens is, if you are able to produce or print the global reserve currency, it makes you weak. And this is what's happened to the US. Like, the US has essentially weakened itself as a result of having the dollar, because we export the dollar, and there's enormous demand for the dollar abroad.
And they have to hold that as reserve currency in order to buy petroleum.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, this is the petrodollar setup, which you probably know about. But what I hypothesize, and I've seen other people talk about this, but it's very rarely discussed. But I think it makes sense when you consider it. There's a phrase that called I'm trying to remember how it goes. Heavy is the crown, right?
Heavy is the head that wears the crown.
Right, right. And so the person that, or the nation that has the global reserve currency, they're in a strange way could theoretically benefit from a non-nation state currency suddenly becoming the reserve. Because if Bitcoin does become the global reserve currency, that would enable the U.S. to build up its productive capacity again, industrial capacity. And so this is something that I think that central bankers are looking at. And
assuming the U.S. people who are in charge of the U.S. want that.
Right,
yeah,
right.
And assuming that we couldn't otherwise simply build up our capacity through any number of other simpler decisions that don't require the implementation of a whole new framework.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's a question of who's actually in charge, which we don't necessarily know, and also are the people in charge actually intelligent, right? Because if the people in charge are actually intelligent and forward thinking, and not just thinking about themselves and their own families, then they'll, in my view, they'll take the wise path, and they'll agree to make maybe create like a basket of currencies, kind of like including Bitcoin and gold and maybe a couple of other things, as the new reserve. They've been discussing this for a while, but we'll see. But yeah, that's one possibility.
There's still this element, and forgive me for just making it so clunky, but Oliver put his finger on something that I was motioning towards, I think, right before he joined the conversation, when I was asking you, Carl, about being optimistic, separating the questions, complex as they are, that the technology itself brings, and assuming that I don't like the term elites, but I know people just use it as a coinage, because to me, being elite involves character as much or more than it involves raw intelligence.
Right.
And I don't see high character in the vast majority of who we call elites. But at any rate, the people who are allegedly running things, that I would be more apt to at least join you in some degree of optimism if I saw some elite somewhere that represented this more organic order and noblesse oblige and the things I was talking about before. But all that to say, Oliver put his finger on something when he made the distinction where, yes, you could have something destroy your crops if you had your own little homestead. But the distinction here, the key distinction that we need to talk about, is that the general framework, as he keeps saying, I mean, Oliver, I don't want to speak for you, but this is how I interpret it, is that we're still on their playing field. And that's kind of the sense that I had, and some of the questions I was asking you about when you were on tap a few weeks ago, Carl, we were talking all about this, is, maybe I'm just being paranoid, but
just because I'm paranoid don't mean nobody's out to get me.
Yeah, right. I feel what Oliver is motioning towards with his question there, in that it might have the clever fingerprint of libertarian principles, but even that could just be a psych out,
or it could be genuine and not matter, because once again, the person who controls the parameters of the discussion controls its results. And that's why I was talking about the network and the rest, and the signals, and how the actual communication, how the actual use of the currency, or whatever the hell it is, takes place.
Right.
Yeah, it's like in your example of the homestead. Wolves could come eat your chickens, or a tornado could pass through, like Oliver stated. What's different here is I feel like if we had a homestead, it's like we bought land on the enemy's property. And I still feel like we're operating, just being on the network, being on the internet, everything that Oliver's been talking about is that we're still in the enemy's frame. And that's what gives me pause about it.
Well, I mean, really what this boils down to, and what I wish that people in our circle would understand, is that if you want to make money, and it doesn't matter, like if you're talking about Bitcoin or something else, you've got to be to some degree optimistic, right? And I don't mean optimistic in the sense that you're kind of an idiot and that you're, making brash
You have
decisions.
to be willing to hopefully take risks.
Right. You have to take educated risks. And now it's okay to be skeptical of things, right? I would never, I think it would be insane and stupid to go out and tell people like, yeah, Bitcoin is risk-free, don't worry about it, buy it, right? Nothing is risk-free, and Bitcoin in particular is probably higher risk than certain other investments you could make, like land, for instance. But you will get better returns when you take on more risk, and in particular, educated risk.
Right,
and I don't want to cut you off, but I don't think we're just talking about financial risk. Like, what's a better investment?
Right.
I think we're talking about things far deeper.
Sorry, Jared. I'm so sorry.
No. It seems like we're going in the same direction. I was just saying. Again, I know it sounds a bit paranoid, but what if we're being funneled into something where it's this lemmings flying off the cliff kind of thing? I'm not talking about is real estate better or is gold better in terms of what's my best return on investment for next quarter and my portfolio. I'm talking about something far more penetrating into all aspects of your life, and this kind of control grid that we are concerned with. And Oliver, what were you getting at with what you were saying?
I would just add that it's not even really just about Bitcoin, because in the short term, Bitcoin seems like a very sensible place to play. If you're smooth enough to like make your fist a little smaller and pull just enough out of the jar without getting trapped, a lot of people are going to walk away from this transitional phase where the games are happening with cryptocurrency, Bitcoin in particular. They're going to come away doing very, very well. And so I hesitate to focus too much on Bitcoin, because at least my point, and I certainly don't want to constrain the conversation, but my point was more about the optimism regarding these technological innovations, or having, so to speak, as you said, one foot in transhumanism at this point. My concern is that the very nature of that animal, it's like we're on their game board. And the only metaphor I would use that I think maybe fits a little bit better, and then I'll turn it over to you, is the idea of property tax. You can think that you first you're renting, and then you get rid of rent, and then you think you bought a house, but actually the bank owes it and you're paying them. So I call renting, third level renting. And then I call having a mortgage second level renting. And then you've got your mortgage paid off and you think you've arrived. Well, no, now you're just at the top tier of renting, which is where you pay the property tax. That system is controlled from top to bottom.
Sure. I mean, it's funny. It's like, there's definitely a European inclination or instinct to want to kind of live on the frontier where you're not subject to property tax and things like that. In Europe, super crowded. compared to the U.S. But I mean, I think that that's another reason I'm optimistic. I think that I look at fertility rates plummeting. It doesn't matter who you're looking at. It could be any group practically in any part of the world. I think we'll see declining populations, except for certain parts of Africa and India. So I think I view that as a good thing. I think that means that we could settle in other places. We can be frontiersmen again in the future. Now, maybe not in our lifetimes, but possibly in the distant future. But another thing that I was thinking about, besides there's Bitcoin, and then of course there's artificial intelligence. We were talking about it earlier, but also there's another technology that's a big deal called CRISPR. And that's another thing that I'm kind of optimistic about, because I think that CRISPR could end up being something that helps every race, not just whites. I think it could help every race.
But that's where JF's arguments would come in, I'd guess, Jared, right?
Yeah, I don't know if you heard me make reference to our conversations with him about the revolutionary phenotype earlier. Yeah, I'm a little rusty on that. Carl, again, I'm used to much more skepticism about such things. We have to get off at 2:15, but I'm curious to continue this conversation, whether tonight or some other time, and hear more of you two talk about all this. It's very interesting, and I'm learning things, and we all love and appreciate that. But why, if you could give us a quick synopsis, are you optimistic about CRISPR?
Because I see what a big difference a few IQ points makes, right? Like 3 or 4 IQ points makes enormous improvement in quality of life, and the governance and things like that.
I've never really had a sense of what just a few points could do. Do you have any kind of way of demonstrating that, like a quick example?
The quick example is it's a big deal.
Yeah,
it's a big deal when your population generally is like 5 points or some such level higher than a neighboring population. 5 points, for example, it makes the difference between whether you can even be employed in the lowest level of being a soldier in the military versus whether they have to just jettison you entirely.
Right. So see, my theory, and we can go into more detail on this in another podcast, but my theory is that we will see certainly within our lifetimes, but probably within the next 2 decades, a huge advance in the ability to alter people's IQ slightly higher. And I think that we'll probably see a pushback against that from the highest IQ groups. So we might see a pushback from the 2 groups that I know you know who I'm talking about. I'm not going to say them out loud because they will not want the competition. But I think it's inevitable that we'll see improvements in IQ, and I think that it'll be across the board, and I think that it'll be great for everybody. I think it'll be good for every group on Earth. So that's another reason I'm kind of optimistic.
I hesitate to ask a question because I know we have to wrap up.
You can make it like a lightning chess round, right? Where you have to hit the buzzer and do your move within 15 seconds.
Yeah, it's still assuming like a neutral. I don't know. I definitely don't, Carl, just to be clear, I don't think like one shadowy group has it all under control in the back room. I tend to think that what we call conspiracy theories, it's more just a funnel. There's been certain rewards and punishments and incentives going on over the last couple of hundred years, funneled people in a certain kinds of behavior. So some of it is just a result of that. And that in terms of people who are making conscious plans behind the scenes, I would imagine that there are different groups with different aims, and sometimes they war with one another, with each other. I think that if one group really had everything on lock, we'd already be living in a very different world right now. So
yeah,
let me just at least get that out of the way.
Recognizing and acknowledging that just reinforced Carl's point about the nature of centralized control in the internet. I have to grant that, because my whole thing has been centralized control, and that point that you just made kind of carries over to mine earlier.
Yeah, but that's not to say that there's not an overall movement towards increased centralization. It's just that there are different groups trying to be the one that, I guess, controls everything and has control of all the different levers. But there's almost like I don't know if neutral or value neutral is the best way to say it, but there's a more benevolent assumption or frame that I'm picking up in what you are presenting.
Yeah.
Where
I think you are naturally kind of skeptical and cautious, whereas I'm kind of a little bit more naturally, you have to be kind of a whack job to have put nearly as much money into Bitcoin as I did back in, the early days. So, clearly yeah. I'm self-selected to be a crazy person, right?
And not to get too into your personal finances, but I know you said it just kind of happened accidentally, where you probably had it spread out and the Bitcoin ballooned. So on strength of that, it's
right
99% of your assets. But I hope this isn't too personal a question, but I know asset allocation is kind of, fundamentals of investing.
Right.
I always like the model of, 10% high risk, and then certain percentage kind of medium risk and a certain percentage low risk.
Yeah.
Why would you have, even if you, love Bitcoin to pieces and think it's just the best thing ever, what's the thinking behind having the vast majority of your assets in one thing, no matter how good that one thing is, whether it's Bitcoin or something else?
Yeah. So my thinking on that, well, two things. It was like, so I was, in my 20s, and I didn't have a family, and I didn't have really responsibilities. And so I was thinking, well, if I'm going to take a risk, I might as well take it now, and so that was part of my rationale. The other thing was like, I was studying rich people. You're reading biographies of wealthy people and books and things like that. And I was trying to figure out, okay, well, what makes these people tick? What makes them different? And I noticed that none of them were believers in the diversification as a good thing, right? The middle-class investors are taught that you're supposed to spread your money out among a bunch of different investments.
Mm-hmm.
And rationally, it makes sense. If you want to preserve capital, that's what you do. But if you look at somebody like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whoever, right? Or just really any rich person, the reason they get super rich is because they don't diversify. That even though their stock is continually going up, and it's making them multi-millionaires, they don't sell it suddenly and then go spread it out among 1,000 different shares of different companies.
Yes. I'm familiar with
right.
like mutual funds being a very middle class instrument.
Right.
I actually got the asset allocation advice just as a partition.
The other funny thing,
who's wealthy.
Yeah. Well, so the other funny thing about it is that I was looking at this stocks, statistically speaking. And I read a book. I forgot the name of the book. I'll try to find it for you next time. But somebody made the point that if you pick 5 random stocks, just any stocks on the stock market, you will correlate, your returns will correlate 95 or 98% with an index fund that has thousands of stocks in it. So in other words, you don't need to buy an index fund or thousands of different companies or even a dozen different companies. You could just buy a handful of different companies and you're already essentially market neutral. So what I realized is very early on was that, well, if you're going to be making a lot of money, or if you're going to try to make a lot of money, you've got to essentially focus your investments in like you're focusing light with a magnifying glass. And so, yeah, I don't want to keep everybody up too late, but that's what caused me to do it.
Yeah, I definitely, I know what you mean about the diversification, and I've heard that's Yeah, that's not
and then
really how
plus,
people do it. But
finally, like just the last reason was because I knew, I mean, and I don't mean to like toot my own horn here, but I knew that I'm a fairly smart guy. So I knew that even if I lost all of my money, I would still be able to come back from it in the future. So even if Bitcoin goes to zero, I'm not going to go commit suicide. I've got a brain, so I've got other ways to make money, figure it out.
Yeah. That, folks, is actually the number one principle that most people don't have. Is, you have to have that belief that you could have it stripped from you and start over. That's, without sounding too Zen New Agey, that's actually the first domino of truly being wealthy.
Yeah, the other thing is that you're going to croak anyway. I mean, we're all, as old friend of mine used to say, we're Morrisons for maggots waiting to open. So you're going to have to learn to let go.
Well, I've read a lot of people say like, oh, I'm going to die a millionaire and my last check is going to bounce. Right. It's like they're going to spend all their money right before they die. To me, that's ridiculous. I want, like, the last day of my life, I want to be richer than ever before. And I want to, dedicate that money to pro-white causes.
Well, on that note, I like the sound of that sort of dedication. And it's been just absolutely magnificent. The totality of this third birthday of TAP and these wonderful gentlemen coming out, and all of you who are stayed up so late with us, or early with us, or midday with us, depending on where you are on planet Earth. I really appreciate that. It's very meaningful to have such a tremendous community composed of so many important and valuable pieces. Each and every one of you are the best in your families, the best in your communities, the best in your towns and counties, regions, states, and countries. And we appreciate you all for that. And this, again, the first It's Late Night Somewhere, the first in quite a little while. And Mr. George and I will be trying to do these maybe a little bit more often, every now and again, get some of the brighter minds together as we have tonight, and have these little chats deep into the evening. It's been a heck of a lot of fun. We had, of course, Carl with us, and Jeff, and Eke, and Semyagog, and then, of course, Jared and myself, and all of you out there communicating your ideas in the live chat were tremendous. I saw a lot of bright thinkers in there. I also want to mention that we have a brand new, very dedicated practitioner of the Go Free and service to white well-being. His name is Ascended Practitioner, and he has been seeing quite a bit of success from going free, and has been demonstrating his gratitude for that in these wonderful financial gifts. And he financially gifted tonight $100. Thank you so very much, dear brother. It's very meaningful, and we appreciate you now for your enthusiasm, and we hope you continue to go free, and sky's the limit, and tap into all of that talent of our ancestors that is inside of you. We also had in the question widget Mestizo, who just wanted to mention a little bit earlier in the night, another great participant in service to white well-being, says, be careful about AI, especially the deep fakes. Tech like that can be used to create fake scandals, especially if it involves beautiful young women. Sick freaks out there. I agree. So if you ever see somebody that looks exactly like me or Mr. George on video doing something completely out of character, it is a deep fake, ladies and gentlemen. But I think that's
anything I don't like is a deep fake.
Precisely. It is a deep fake.
Let me just say this. We're actually, we're speaking to some of the guys behind the scenes. We're actually going to continue this on my channel. There's a bit of I don't know. We feel the momentum and want to keep exploring some of these themes. So everybody, check it out. We're gonna continue this on my channel. If you want to hop on over there for a little while longer.
Jared, did you put your link in the chat yet?
I haven't even created the stream yet, so everybody's got to bear with me for a few minutes. But you know what? Let me put the link to my actual channel itself, at least, so you know where to go. If some of you might not be subscribed, and it'll show up there in a few minutes. You're going to have to just give me a few minutes. But all right, I put in the chat my channel. Keep an eye on that. Give me like a good 5 minutes or so, and I'll get it set up.
There you heard it, folks. 5 minutes, and head on over to
5 to 10 minutes. Yeah.
5 to 10 minutes. Head on over to Mr. George's channel and hold your breath, and then the thumbnail will pop up for the stream, the conversation that will continue here about things like IQ increasing and robotics,
AI, Bitcoin, the future of civilization.
But as we come to the end of the evening, it would be remiss of me not to circle back around and congratulate you and not congratulate you, Jason and Jared, on 3 years of this operation. And thanks so much for having me on. And I wish you the best in the coming year, given that we've just crested your most recent anniversary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
All of you. It's been magnificent.
Yeah, congrats.
It's been magnificent, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be talking with these brilliant men and dedicated men again in the very near future. And hold your breath, as I say. You held on over to Jared George's YouTube channel, and you'll be able to participate in the conversation as it continues. But for me, I've got work to do, and I got to get ready for Going Free tomorrow.
Yeah, tune into Going Free. Tune into Going Free, 5 p.m. Eastern on this channel, No White Guilt. And thank you, Jason. Hey, we've done this for 3 years, man. Here's to many more.
Indeed. Amen to that, brother. All right, folks. We'll talk to you soon.